Tonight, one man moves. Not a king, not a lord, not a knight, because Sandor Clegane is not a knight and will cut your throat if you call him one. One man moves at the wrong moment for the wrong reasons and saves the right person, and the saving changes everything. The steps of the Great Sept of Baelor, the crowd, the boy king on his throne of arrogance, the queen beside him, the executioner with ice, Ned Stark's own sword, the Valyrian steel greatsword that the Starks had carried for centuries, now in the hands of the man about to take Ned Stark's head with it. Elin Payne, the tongueless executioner, the sword raised, the crowd screaming, Sansa Stark screaming, the birds taking flight from the Sept's towers because even the birds knew what was coming, and Sandor Clegane, the Hound, the burned man, the sworn shield of a king he despised, standing 3 steps away from the thing he was about to do, the thing that was not honor, the thing that was not duty, the thing that was not courage or principle or any of the pretty words that knights used to justify the things they did. The thing was disgust, pure, physical, gut-level disgust at watching a good man die because a vicious boy said the word. The Hound did not save Ned Stark because the Hound was good. The Hound saved Ned Stark because the Hound was honest, and honesty, in a court of liars and killers, and men who pretended the killing was justice, was the most dangerous thing in the 7 Kingdoms. The steps, the moment. The sword was going up, ice, the Valyrian steel, the greatsword that was too large for the tongueless man who held it, Elin Payne, the royal executioner, the hollow-eyed mute, whose only skill was the downward stroke. Payne held ice above Ned Stark's exposed neck. The crowd was screaming. The Sept of Baelor's steps were the stage. The performance was the execution of the Hand of the King, the former Hand, the disgraced lord, the man who had been too honest for a city of liars and who was now on his knees with his own sword about to take his head. Sandor Clegane stood 3 steps to the left. The Hound, the burned man, the enormous warrior whose face was half ruin, the left side scarred by fire, the burns that his brother Gregor had given him when Sandor was 7, the damage that had defined everything Sandor was and everything Sandor hated. The Hound stood in the Kingsguard's position, Joffrey's sworn shield, the King's protector, the duty that the Hound performed not because the Hound believed in duty, but because the Hound had nowhere else to go. The Hound watched. He watched Ned Stark on his knees, the Northern Lord, the honorable fool who had come south and discovered that the South ate honorable fools the way dogs ate meat, quickly, messily, without apology. Stark was on his knees because Stark had told the truth about the Queen's children, and the truth had been the thing that the Lannisters could not permit, and the not permitting had produced the arrest and the confession and the execution that was about to happen. The Hound watched Joffrey, the boy king, the golden-haired monster whose cruelty was not the calculated cruelty of his grandfather. Tywin's cruelty served a purpose, or the desperate cruelty of his mother. Cersei's cruelty served survival, but the purposeless cruelty of a child who had been given power and who used the power the way children used wings on insects, tearing, breaking, because the tearing and breaking produced the screaming, and the screaming was the only thing that made the boy feel large. Joffrey had promised Ned would be spared. Cersei had arranged the confession. The deal was, Ned confesses, Ned takes the black, Ned goes to the wall. The deal was the political solution, the managed outcome that avoided the war and maintained the balance. Joffrey broke the deal, because Joffrey wanted the head. Because the head was the thing that made Joffrey feel like a king, the way the torn wings made the boy feel like a god. "Sir Eilin," Joffrey said, "bring me his head." The crowd roared, the sword went up, and Sandor Clegane felt the thing. Not conscience. The Hound did not have a conscience. conscience was for knights, and the Hound was not a knight, and the distinction was the thing the Hound held like a shield against every accusation of goodness that the world might throw at him. Not honor. Honor was the word that liars used to justify the things they did in the dark. Honor was the white cloak that covered the red hands. Honor was Jaime Lannister killing a king and calling it duty. Disgust. The Hound felt disgust. The physical, visceral, body-level revulsion of a man watching a vicious child murder a good man and calling it justice. The disgust was not moral. The disgust was mechanical. The gut's rejection of a thing that the gut could not absorb, the way the body rejected poison. The sword was at the top of its arc. The Hound moved. The moving was not a decision. The moving was the body acting before the mind could stop it. The warrior's reflex. The trained response to the sight of a blade falling toward a man who did not deserve the falling. The Hound's body had been trained to fight for 30 years. The body did not consult the mind. The body moved. 3 steps. The Hound covered the 3 steps between his position and Payne's position in the time it took Payne to begin the downward stroke. 3 steps, the burned man's boots on the stone of Baelor's sept, the massive body moving with the speed that the massive body should not have possessed, but that the Hound had always possessed, the quickness that lived inside the size like a blade inside a sheath. The Hound's sword met ice. The impact was enormous. 2 swords colliding, the Hound's bastard blade and the Valyrian steel greatsword, the clash producing a sound that cut through the crowd screaming like a horn through fog. The sound was the announcement. Something was happening that was not supposed to happen. Payne stumbled. The tongueless executioner, not a fighter, not a warrior, the man whose skill was the downward stroke and nothing else. Payne stumbled under the impact of the Hound's blow. Ice deflected. The stroke that was aimed at Ned Stark's neck went wide. Not missing. Not by much. The blade passing through the air where Ned's neck had been a heartbeat before. The Hound hit Payne. Not with the sword, with the body. The Hound was the largest man on the steps, except for the Mountain, who was not present, who was in the Riverlands, who was burning and killing, because burning and killing was what the Mountain did. The Hound's body struck Payne's body with the force of a charging horse, and Payne went down. The executioner on his back, ice clattering on the stone, the Valyrian steel singing as it skidded across the steps of the sept. The crowd went silent. The silence was the shock, the collective paralysis of 1,000 people who had come to watch an execution and who were now watching something else, something that the crowd's vocabulary did not have a word for, because the thing that was happening was unprecedented. A king's sworn shield had just attacked the king's executioner. On the steps of the sept, in front of the court, in front of the king. The silence lasted 2 heartbeats. Then Joffrey screamed, "Kill him! Kill him! Kill the Hound!" The king's guard moved. The white cloaks, 5 of them, the knights who served the king and who were now, at the king's screaming command, drawing swords and moving toward the burned man who had just committed the most public act of treason in living memory. The Hound looked at them. The 5 Kingsguard. The white cloaks. The men whose job was the same job the Hound had just abandoned, protecting the king, and who were now the enemy. "Come on then," the Hound said. He picked up Ned Stark. Not gently. The Hound did not do gently. He grabbed Ned by the arm and hauled the Northern Lord to his feet with the strength that 30 years of fighting had produced. Ned was weak. The weeks in the dungeon had thinned him. The confession had broken something. The expectation of death had produced the resignation that people produced when the dying was accepted. "Move," the Hound said. "What? Move. Or die on these steps. Your choice." Ned moved. Because the alternative was dying. And even a man who had accepted death chose living when the living was offered by a burned man with a sword. The Hound grabbed Arya's wrist on the way down. Not gently, the Hound's grip was iron, the burned man's hands closing around the girl's arm with the force that left bruises and that the girl would complain about later, and that saved the girl's life. Because the grip was the thing that pulled the girl out of the crowd's crush. Arya had been running toward her father. The 11-year-old's impulse, the child sprinting through the crowd toward the man on the steps, the instinct that overrode the survival sense because the instinct was, Father. Father is there. Father needs me. The Hound's grip intercepted the instinct. The burned man, hauling Ned with one hand and grabbing Arya with the other, the two Starks collected like cargo by a man whose combat instincts had identified the girl in the crowd, the same way the instincts identified threats on a battlefield. Through the peripheral vision that 30 years of fighting had sharpened into something that was not sight, but awareness. Let go. Shut up and run. That's my father. That's your father, and he's running, and you're running, and we're all running, or we're all dead. Move. The Hound and Ned Stark and Arya Stark ran. Down the steps of Baelor's Sept, through the crowd that parted because the Hound was enormous and armed and running, and the crowd's instinct was to get out of the way of the enormous armed running man. Through the streets of King's Landing, the narrow alleys, the stinking lanes, the labyrinth that the Hound knew because the Hound had patrolled the capital for years and because the knowing of the streets was the warrior's survival skill. Behind them, the Kingsguard, the Lannister Guards, the City Watch, the machinery of the crown that was now mobilized against the man who had been its shield. The Hound ran. Ned ran. The escape had begun. The girl? Who followed? Arya Stark was in the crowd. She had been in the crowd since the morning, the small girl with the dirty face and the boy's clothing and the sword, needle, the thin blade that Jon had given her, hidden under the rags. Arya had been watching her father on the steps. Arya had been watching her father kneel. Arya had been watching her father's sword, Ice, the family sword, raised above her father's neck. Arya had been about to do something stupid. Not planned stupid, instinct stupid, the 11-year-old's reflex to run toward the thing that was hurting the person she loved, the child's impulse to try to stop the unstoppable, because the stopping was the only option the child's heart could produce. Then the Hound moved. And the moving stopped Arya's stupid, because the Hound's stupid was bigger and more effective, and the Hound's sword was larger than needle, and the Hound's body was the weapon that Arya's body could never be. Arya watched the Hound grab her father. Arya watched the Hound haul her father down the steps. Arya watched the escape begin. Arya followed. Not because Arya decided to follow, because Arya's feet followed, the body acting before the mind could calculate, the girl's instinct driving the girl's legs in the direction of her father. The crowd was parting. The Hound was running. Ned was running. Arya was running behind them, the small girl in the big crowd, invisible because smallness was invisibility, in a crowd that was focused on the enormous burned man and the Northern Lord. Arya caught up in the third alley. The Hound had stopped. Not because the Hound wanted to stop, because the Hound had reached the first decision point. Which direction? The capital had 20 gates and 1,000 alleys, and the choice of direction was the choice between escape and capture. Ned was leaning against a wall. The former hand, thin, weak, the weeks of dungeon and the trauma of the near execution producing the physical collapse that adrenaline had temporarily prevented. Ned was breathing. The breathing was the thing that meant alive. Still alive. Despite everything. "Father," Arya said. Ned looked at his daughter. The girl, the dirty-faced, boy-clothed small girl who was standing in an alley in King's Landing with a sword at her hip, and the eyes that were Ned's eyes, Lyanna's eyes, the Stark eyes that held the fierceness that was Arya's signature. Arya, you're alive. The Hound. I know. I saw. Arya looked at the Hound. The burned man. The monster. The man who had killed her friend Micah. The butcher's boy. The child that the Hound had run down on Joffrey's orders. The man Arya had put on her list. You saved him, Arya said to the Hound. I did a stupid thing. You saved my father. I did a stupid thing. And the stupid is going to get all three of us killed if we don't move. Where? North, out of the city. Away from the Lannisters and the Kingsguard and every other sword that's currently being mobilized to find us. How do we get out of the city? Through the Gate of the Gods. The gate faces north. The watch at the gate is. The watch at the gate is the least competent watch in the capital because the gate faces north and nothing comes from the north that the capital cares about. You know the city. I've been patrolling this stinking city for years. I know every gate and every alley and every place where a man can hide. Move. They moved. The Hound and Ned Stark and Arya Stark, the three-person escape party, the most unlikely group in the 7 kingdoms. A burned killer, a broken lord, and an 11-year-old girl with a sword named after a sewing implement. The escape. 6 hours in the city. The escape from King's Landing took 6 hours. The first hour was the most dangerous. The Sept of Baelor was in the city's centre, the geographic heart of King's Landing, the point that was farthest from every gate. The first hour was the hour of the city closing around them, the guards mobilizing, the streets filling with the noise of a capital in alarm. The Hound navigated through Flea Bottom, not through the main streets, through the alleys, the back passages, the narrow corridors between buildings that the City Watch never patrolled, because the Watch had learned that patrolling Flea Bottom's back alleys was the kind of duty that produced dead watchmen. Down here, the Hound said, turning into a passage that was barely wide enough for his shoulders. The burned man leading, Ned behind, Arya bringing up the rear, the girl small enough for the alley, the Lord thin enough from the dungeon, the Hound forcing his bulk through the gap. Where are we going? Ned said. The Iron Gate. You said, the Gate of the Gods. I said the Gate of the Gods, because the Gate of the Gods is where they'll expect us to go, north, toward the King's Road, toward the obvious escape route that every fugitive takes, because every fugitive wants to go home and home is north. We're going to the Iron Gate, east, toward the coast. Then we circle north outside the walls. That's longer. Longer is alive. Shorter is dead. Pick one. They moved through Flea Bottom. The stink, the poverty district's permanent odor, the combination of sewage and cooking, and too many bodies in too little space. The stink was the disguise. Nobody looked for a lord in Flea Bottom because lords did not enter Flea Bottom, and the looking was the thing the stink prevented. The second hour produced the first close call. A patrol, 5 city watchmen, the gold cloaks, the capital's police force, moving through the street of silk with the purposeful pace of men who had been given orders and who were following the orders with the minimum effort that the orders required. The Hound saw them first. The warrior's awareness, the peripheral detection that processed the movement before the mind identified the movement's source. Down, the Hound's command. Flat. No volume. The word that meant get below the sightline. Ned dropped. Not gracefully, the former hand of the king crouching behind a merchant's cart with the artlessness of a man who had never hidden from anything in his life. because Ned Stark had spent his entire life facing things rather than hiding from them. Arya dropped better. The girl who had been living on the streets of King's Landing for weeks, the survival instinct that had been sharpened by the weeks of disguise and danger, and the daily practice of being invisible in a city that was looking for her. The patrol passed, the gold cloaks walking 10 feet from the cart, the watchman's eyes scanning the street without seeing the 3 people crouching behind the merchant's vegetables. "They're not looking hard," Arya said, after the patrol passed. "They're City Watch. The City Watch looks hard when the City Watch is paid to look hard. Nobody has paid them yet. They'll be paid soon. By the time the paying reaches the street patrols, we'll be outside the walls." The third hour was the river. The Blackwater Rush, the river that ran through King's Landing, the waterway that divided the city, and that was, for the 3 fugitives, an obstacle. The bridges were watched. The fords were watched. The river was the boundary that the city's security used to divide the escape routes into manageable sectors. "We swim," the Hound said. "I can't swim in this condition," Ned said. The honesty, the Lord's assessment of his own body, the dungeon-weakened frame that could walk and could hide, but that could not fight the current of a river. You don't swim, you float. I swim. You hold on. Hold on to what? To me. Ned looked at the Hound, the enormous man, the burned face, the man who was offering his body as a flotation device for a lord who could not swim, because the Lord's body had been broken by the Lord's own king. "This is undignified," Ned said. "Dignity is for men who aren't being hunted. Hold on or drown. Third option, stay here and get caught." Ned held on. The Hound swam the Blackwater, with Ned Stark clinging to his back and Arya swimming beside them. The girl who could swim because Arya could do everything physical that the world tried to prevent girls from doing. The crossing was cold and dangerous and thoroughly undignified, and the undignity was the thing that kept them alive, because the Watch was watching the bridges and the fords and was not watching the stretch of dark river where a burned man swam with a lord on his back. The 4th and 5th hours were the eastern districts, the poorer neighborhoods east of the river, the areas that the Crown's attention reached last because the Crown's attention was focused on the Red Keep and the Sept and the wealthy districts that surrounded both. The eastern districts were the hinterland, the political periphery, the parts of the capital that the capital pretended did not exist. "You know these streets," Ned said. "I patrolled them for years. The Hound's patrol, the route that the Kingsguard gave me, because the route was the one nobody else wanted. The eastern districts, the shit assignments. The shit assignments are saving our lives. The shit assignments are always the ones that matter. The lords don't know that. The shit knows. The 6th hour was the gate, the Iron Gate, the Eastern Gate, the gate that faced the Blackwater Bay, the gate that was the least dramatic exit from the capital and therefore the least guarded. The Iron Gate was for merchants and fishermen and the traffic of a port city that moved through the east rather than the north. The gate was open. The watch at the gate, 3 men, the minimum complement, the assignment that the watch gave to the men who were too old or too lazy for the more important posts. "Walk," the Hound said. "Don't run. Don't look at the watch. Walk through like you belong. I'm the former hand of the king. You're a thin man in dirty clothes. Nobody recognizes a lord when the lord looks like a beggar." They walked through. 3 figures in the dusk, a large man, a thin man, a small girl. The watch at the Iron Gate looked and did not see, because the looking was the habit, and the seeing required the attention that the habit did not provide. They walked through the Iron Gate and out of King's Landing. The escape from King's Landing took 6 hours. 6 hours of alleys and back streets, and the constant awareness that the city was hunting them, the Lannister guards searching, The city watch mobilized, the gates being closed one by one as the machinery of the crown responded to the most embarrassing security failure in its history. The Hound navigated. The navigation was the Hound's skill, the knowledge of the city's architecture, the understanding of where the watch was thin and where the watch was thick, and where the gaps existed that a man or three could slip through. The gate of the gods was the gap. The gate was open when they arrived, not because the watch had been careless, but because the gate faced north, and the watch at the northern gate had not yet received the order to close. The communication between the Red Keep and the northern gate was the slowest in the capital, because the northern gate was the least important gate, and the least important things were communicated last. They went through, at dusk, in the orange light. The burned man and the broken lord and the fierce girl walking through the gate of the gods and onto the King's Road and into the country that was not the capital, and that was therefore not the cage. The air changed. The stink of King's Landing, the million bodies, the heat, the sewage, the rot, the stink faded behind them. The air of the King's Road was different, cleaner. The northern air, the air that moved south from the neck and the north, and the cold places where the Starks had lived for 8,000 years. Ned breathed. The first clean breath since the dungeon. The first breath that was not the breath of a man waiting to die, but the breath of a man who was alive and who was, impossibly, inexplicably, through the intervention of a man who should not have intervened, free. Why? Ned said. The Hound was walking, the burned face forward, the massive body moving with the purposeful stride of a man who had calculated the escape and who was now executing the next phase. Distance. Every step was a step away from the capital and a step toward survival. Why what? The Hound said, not turning. Why did you save me? Didn't save you. Stopped a killing. The distinction matters to me. Don't make this into something it isn't, Stark. I didn't save you because you're noble, or because your cause is just, or because the pretty words mean something. I stopped a killing because the killing was wrong. 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 Not morally wrong. I don't give a damn about morals. Wrong the way a bad sword stroke is wrong. Wrong the way a rigged fight is wrong. The boy said, spare him. The deal was the wall. The boy broke the deal because the boy wanted to feel big. The killing was wrong because the killing was dishonest. And the Hound stopped walking, the massive frame turning, the burned face looking at Ned with the eyes that were not the eyes of a hero or a savior, but the eyes of a man who had been watching dishonesty for years and who had finally, on the steps of a sept, reached the limit. I'm a lot of things, Stark. A killer, a drunk, a dog. But I'm not a liar. And standing there, watching a liar's death happen and pretending it was justice, that was the lie I couldn't tell. That's not noble. Don't make it noble. I did a thing because the thing needed doing and nobody else was going to do it. That's all. All right. All right. Now walk. We've got 300 miles between here and your son's army, and every mile is a mile where the Lannisters can find us. They walked. North. Into the night. The Hound and the wolf and the pup, heading for the war that the escape had made inevitable, and the future that the Hound's moment of disgust had created. King's Landing. What the Hound's moment broke. The escape broke King's Landing. Not physically, the wall held, the gates closed. Eventually, the city continued to function in the mechanical way that cities functioned regardless of the political earthquakes that happened inside their walls. The escape broke the politics. Joffrey's rage was the first break. The Boy King raged for 3 days. The rage was the Joffrey rage, screaming, violent, the tantrum of a child with a crown who had been denied the thing the crown had promised. The head, Ned Stark's head. The trophy that Joffrey had demanded and that the Hound, Joffrey's own shield, had stolen. "I want them dead!" Joffrey screamed. At the council, at the Kingsguard, at the walls. "I want the Hound's head and Stark's head, and I want them here, on spikes, where I can see them." "Your Grace," Cersei said, the Queen Regent, the mother managing the son, the political operator managing the crisis. "The Hound's betrayal is unprecedented, but the response must be measured." "Measured? The dog betrayed me, in front of the court, in front of the city." The dog is a traitor and will be treated as such. But the response must not, "I want his head." And you'll have it. But first, we must manage the consequences. The consequences were enormous. Consequence 1. Ned Stark was alive. The confession, the public confession that Cersei had arranged, the confession that was supposed to end the Stark threat, the confession was now worthless. The man who had confessed was free. The confession, made under duress, would be retracted. The truth that the confession was designed to bury, the truth about Cersei's children, the truth was walking north with a burned bodyguard and a very angry little girl. Consequence 2. The Northern War was no longer a war of revenge. In the other world, the world where Ned died, the Northern War had been a war of grief. Robb Stark fighting for his dead father's honor, the war that was noble and hopeless because the man who motivated it was already gone. In this world, the war was a war of rescue. Ned was alive. Ned was heading north. Ned was the thing the North was fighting for. And fighting for a living man was different from fighting for a dead one. Consequence 3. Sansa. Sansa Stark was still in King's Landing. The hostage. The girl who had been standing on the steps of Baelor's Sept watching her father almost die, and who was now the Lannisters' last leverage over the Stark family. Sansa was the prisoner whose value had just increased enormously because Ned alive meant the Starks would negotiate, and negotiations required hostages. Cersei managed. Cersei managed because managing was what Cersei did, the Queen Regent whose primary skill was the navigation of crises that Cersei's own family had often created. "Sansa remains," Cersei said, at the council. "Sansa is our guarantee. Ned Stark will not attack King's Landing while his daughter is inside it." "The North is already marching," Tyrion said. The Impetiat, the youngest Lannister, who had been summoned from the Riverlands to manage the crisis that the family's golden members had created. Robb Stark called the banners before the execution. "The Northern Army is in the field. Ned Stark's survival doesn't change the marching. It changes the marching's purpose." And the purpose? The purpose was vengeance. Now it's reunion. Vengeance is emotional and can be managed. Reunion is personal and can't be. The Starks will fight harder for a living father than for a dead one. Then we need the father dead. We need the father caught. Dead was the plan. And the plan failed on the steps of the Sept because someone, Tyrion looked at the empty chair where the Hound would have sat, because someone forgot to inform the guard dog that the plan required his compliance. The Hound was the one honest man in the Red Keep, and the one honest man did the one honest thing. The surprise is not that the Hound acted. The surprise is that nobody saw it coming. Cersei held Tyrion's assessment. The brother, the little brother, the sharp-tongued dwarf, whose intelligence was the Lannister intelligence without the Lannister beauty, and whose assessments were therefore ignored by the family that produced them. "Find Ned Stark," Cersei said, "before he reaches the Northern Army. If Stark reaches his son, the war becomes a war with a leader. A war with a leader and a war without a leader are different things. Without Ned, the North fights angry. With Ned, the North fights smart. And smart is the thing we can't afford the North to be. Tywin, what the lion heard. Tywin Lannister received the Raven at Harrenhal. The Lord of Casterly Rock was in the Riverlands, commanding the Lannister forces, prosecuting the war against the Northern Rebellion, conducting the campaign with the cold efficiency that was the Lannister military signature. Tywin was at war. Tywin was winning. Tywin was doing the thing that Tywin did best, destroying his enemies through the systematic application of superior resources. The Raven changed the calculus. Ned Stark escaped execution. Sandor Clegane defected. The Hound and Stark are heading north with the younger Stark girl. Sansa Stark remains in custody. Tywin read the Raven once. Tywin set the Raven down. Tywin's face, the face that did not change, the face that processed the worst news with the same expression that processed the weather. Tywin's face registered nothing. Kevan, Tywin said, to his brother, the reliable Lannister, the second son whose loyalty was absolute, and whose competence was the foundation that Tywin's brilliance required. My lord, the Stark is alive. Alive and heading north. Alive and heading north with the Hound. Tywin held the name. The Hound, the man who had served the Lannister family for years, the sworn shield of Tywin's grandson, the warrior whose loyalty had been assumed because the loyalty had been purchased, and purchased loyalties were the loyalties that Tywin understood best. The Hound's defection is unexpected. The Hound was never loyal. The Hound was always obedient. Obedience and loyalty are different things, and the difference is the thing I failed to account for. What does it change? It changes the war. Ned Stark alive changes the Northern Rebellion from a boys' crusade to a lord's campaign. A boys' crusade burns hot and burns out. A lord's campaign is sustained, strategic. The kind of campaign that my grandson's court is not equipped to manage. The court has Cersei. The court has my daughter, whose management of the situation produced the execution that produced the escape. Cersei's management is the problem, not the solution. Tywin assessed. The assessment was the Tywin assessment, comprehensive, cold, the evaluation of every variable that the new information had introduced. Variable 1. Ned Stark alive. The most respected lord in the Seven Kingdoms, heading north to rejoin his son's army. The legitimacy that Stark's presence would provide was the thing that transformed the Northern Rebellion from a manageable insurrection into a genuine threat. Variable 2. The Hound. Sandor Clegane, the man whose defection was not merely a military loss, one fighter, however skilled, was replaceable, but a political disaster. The king's own sworn shield had betrayed the king in public, on the steps of the Sept, in front of the court. The betrayal said, even the king's guard does not believe in the king's justice. Variable 3. Sansa, the remaining hostage, the one Stark in Lannister hands. Sansa's value had increased with Ned's escape. The leverage that the hostage provided was the only leverage that remained. The girl, Tywin said. Sansa. She is not to be harmed. Joffrey. Joffrey is a boy who needs managing. My daughter will manage the boy. If my daughter cannot manage the boy, I will manage the boy myself. The girl is not to be harmed because the girl is the only card we hold, and a damaged card is a worthless card. And the pursuit? Continue the pursuit, but do not expect success. The Hound knows the country. The Hound is the most dangerous man outside of this camp. The pursuit is the appearance of action. The reality is, the Stark will reach his son. The reality is, we must prepare for the war that the reaching produces. Tywin prepared. The preparation was the Tywin preparation, invisible, comprehensive, the strategic repositioning that the lion conducted while the world watched the pursuit and did not watch the preparing. The preparing was the thing that mattered. The pursuit was the performance. The hunt began. Ravens, riders, the Lannister network, the spy system, the informants, the gold-lubricated intelligence apparatus that Tywin had built and that the Crown had inherited. The network mobilized to find 3 people on the King's Road, a burned man, a northern lord, and a girl with a sword. The hunt would not be easy. The King's Road was long. The riverlands were chaos. The Hound knew the countryside as well as he knew the capital. And the Hound was the kind of man who was very difficult to find when the Hound did not want to be found. The road. What the Hound and Ned were to each other. The first night. What the 3 travelers were. The first night out of King's Landing, they slept in a ditch. Not a metaphorical ditch, an actual ditch. A drainage channel beside the Rosby Road, the eastern route that the Hound had chosen instead of the King's Road, because the King's Road was the obvious route, and obvious routes were the routes that search parties searched. Ned Stark had never slept in a ditch. The Lord of Winterfell, the Warden of the North, the man who had governed the largest territory in the 7 kingdoms from the comfort of a castle that had hot springs running through its walls. Ned Stark lay in a drainage ditch beside a road in the Crownlands and looked at the stars and processed the impossibility of his situation. "This is a ditch," Ned said. "Noticed that, did you? I'm the Lord of Winterfell. You're a fugitive. Fugitives sleep in ditches. Lords sleep in castles. You're not in a castle. Do the arithmetic. The arithmetic suggests I'm sleeping in a ditch. Top marks, my lord." Arya was already asleep. The girl's ability to sleep anywhere, the survival skill that children possessed and that adults had lost, the body's capacity to shut down regardless of the surface or the danger or the absurdity of the situation. Arya was asleep in the ditch with Needle beside her and the child's face that was in sleep. The face of an 11-year-old rather than the face of the fierce survivor that the waking hours produced. "She shouldn't be here," Ned said. "She shouldn't be a lot of places." "She's here?" "She's 11. She's 11, and she's alive, and she's sleeping. Those are 3 things that a lot of people in King's Landing can't say right now. Are you trying to comfort me? I'm trying to shut you up so I can sleep. That's not comfort. No, it's honesty. The comfort and the honesty are not the same thing, and I don't do the first one." The ditch was cold. The night was long. The 3 travelers, the burned man, the northern lord, the fierce girl, slept in a drainage channel beside a road in the Crownlands, and the sleeping was the first night of the 300 miles that lay between them and the Northern Army. The third day. What Ned learned about the Hound. On the third day, Ned learned that the Hound could cook. Not well, the Hound's cooking was the soldier's cooking, the minimal effort preparation of food that was designed to provide nutrition rather than pleasure. But the Hound could catch a rabbit. The Hound set snares with the efficiency of a man who had lived off the land before. Skin the rabbit. The Hound's knife work was as precise on animals as it was on men. And roast the rabbit over a fire that the Hound built with the speed of a man who had built 1,000 fires. "Where did you learn this?" Ned asked. "Eating the rabbit." The rabbit was edible. The rabbit was not pleasant. The rabbit was the best food Ned had tasted since the dungeon because the dungeon's food had been worse. The road. Which road? Every road. Before the Lannisters, I was... The Hound stopped. The stopping was the wall that the Hound maintained between the present and the past, the barrier that prevented the conversation from reaching the territory that the Hound did not permit conversations to reach. "You were what?" "I was nobody. A second son. A burned boy. A boy who left his father's keep because the keep had his brother in it, and the brother was the thing that the boy needed to be away from. Gregor. Don't say his name. Your brother. I said, don't say his name. The name is the Hound's jaw, the muscle working, the physical expression of the rage that the Hound carried for his brother, the rage that was older than the burns and deeper than the scars. And that was the foundation on which the Hound's entire personality had been constructed. The name is the thing I don't discuss. All right. All right. The cooking is good. The cooking is adequate. The good is your hunger talking. My hunger has been talking for weeks. The hunger says the cooking is good. Then the hunger and I agree on something. The third day also produced the first conversation between the Hound and Arya that was not an argument. Arya was walking ahead. The girl's pace, faster than Ned's. The dungeon had weakened him. Slower than the Hound's. The Hound's legs were longer than anyone's. Arya was walking, and Arya was practicing. The footwork that Syrio had taught. The water dance's movements adapted to walking. The practice that was invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Your feet are wrong, the Hound said. Arya stopped. What? Your feet. The dancing thing you're doing. The left foot is too far forward. How do you know about the water dance? The water. So I know about fighting, all fighting. The Braavosi style is, it's fast and it's pretty, and it works against men who fight the same style. Against men who fight like me. Big, strong, direct. The Braavosi style loses because the Braavosi style assumes the fight stays at distance and big men close the distance. Syrio said, Syrio taught you to fight like a Braavosi. I'm telling you how a Braavosi fights against a Westerosi. The answer is, the Braavosi adjusts or the Braavosi dies. You're offering to teach me. I'm offering to tell you what's wrong with your footwork. The teaching is your problem. My left foot is too far forward. Pull it back 3 inches. Widen your stance. The dancing is fine for dancing. The fighting requires the stance that lets you move backward as fast as you move forward. Because the thing coming at you is bigger than you. And the bigger thing's first move is always forward. Arya adjusted. The adjustment was the girl's ability, the natural skill that absorbed instruction through the body rather than the mind. The physical intelligence that Syrio had recognized, and that the Hound was now, without admitting it, nurturing. Better, the Hound said, and walked on. Ned watched. The father watching the burned man correct his daughter's sword stance. The father seeing the thing that the Hound would deny, the teaching, the protection that was disguised as criticism, the care that was disguised as annoyance. The 5th day, what Ned told the Hound. On the 5th day, the Hound asked about Joffrey. Not about Joffrey's cruelty. The Hound had seen Joffrey's cruelty firsthand. The years of serving as the Boy King's shield, providing the front row seat to the viciousness that the court glimpsed and that the shield endured. The Hound asked about the truth. The boy's not Robert's, the Hound said. Not a question, a statement. The flat delivery of a conclusion that the Hound had reached through observation and that the Hound was now verifying. Ned looked at the Hound. You know, Ned said, I've been standing 3 feet from the Queen for 6 years. 3 feet from the Queen and 3 feet from the Kingslayer. The distance is educational. What did you see? What everyone saw. The looks, the proximity, the way the golden twins orbited each other like they were the only 2 people in the room. The way the Queen looked at the Kingslayer when she thought nobody was watching. The way the Kingslayer looked at the Queen when he knew people were watching. Because the Kingslayer didn't care. Because the Kingslayer's arrogance was the thing that made the Kingslayer careless. You knew. I suspected. Suspicion isn't knowledge. Knowledge is your department. You're the Lord who investigated. I'm the dog who watched. and the children. The children are golden. Robert is black. The arithmetic is the thing that got you arrested, Stark. The arithmetic is the truth. The truth is the most dangerous thing in King's Landing. The truth is the thing that gets people executed on the steps of Sept. The truth is the thing you saved me for. I saved you because the killing was dishonest. The truth is your problem. The honesty is mine. Ned held this. The distinction, the Hound's distinction, the line between truth, a political concept, and honesty, a personal concept. The Hound did not care about the truth of Joffrey's parentage. The Hound cared about the honesty of the execution. The two were different things, and the difference was the Hound's entire moral architecture. You're a complicated man, Clegane. I'm the simplest man you've ever met. The complications are the world's. I'm just living in it. The road. What the Hound and Ned were to each other. Boetash. The road north was 300 miles of mutual discomfort. Not hostility. The Hound and Ned were not hostile. They were incompatible. The burned killer and the honourable lord. The man who believed in nothing and the man who believed in everything. The cynic and the idealist, forced together by an act of impulse that neither of them had planned and that both of them were now living with. The discomfort was productive. The discomfort was the thing that made the road interesting, because two compatible people on a road produced comfortable silence, and two incompatible people on a road produced the friction that generated the heat, that generated the honesty, that generated the conversations that mattered. You killed the butcher's boy, Arya said. On the second day, walking, the King's Road stretching north ahead of them, the capital a day behind, the future 100 uncertain miles ahead. I did. Micah. His name was Micah. I know his name. You ran him down, on a horse. A boy. A child. I was following orders. Following orders. Following orders from the prince, the king, the crown. The boy ran. The order was, bring the boy back. The boy ran into a field, and the horse was faster than the boy, and the horse caught the boy, and the catching. The Hound stopped. The pause was not the dramatic pause. The Hound did not do drama. The pause was the mechanical pause, the stop in the speech that happened when the speech reached the thing that the speech did not want to reach. The catching went wrong. Went wrong. The boy fell. The horse. The Hound's jaw. The boy died because I was on a horse, and the boy was not on a horse, and horses are bigger than boys. That's what happened. That's what happened, girl. I didn't murder the boy. I was following orders. And the following produced a death, and the death is the thing I carry. Not the thing I'm proud of. Not the thing I explain. The thing I carry. That's not enough. It's not enough for you. It's enough for me. And since I'm the one carrying it, my enough is the enough that matters. Ned listened. The father listening to the daughter's accusation and the burned man's defense. The conversation that was not a debate, but a reckoning. The 11-year-old demanding accountability from the man who had killed her friend, and the man providing accountability that was not apology and not justification, but something in between. He was on her list, Ned said, that night. After Arya was asleep, the father and the burned man sitting at the fire. The King's Road's night, dark, cold, the sounds of the countryside replacing the sounds of the capital. List? Arya keeps a list of people she intends to, people she believes deserve. Killing. The girl keeps a kill list. She's 11. She's 11 with a sword and a list. In my experience, that's the most dangerous combination in the world. She's a child. She's a child who's lived through Stark. She watched you almost die on the steps of a Sept. She's been living in the streets of King's Landing, disguised as a boy. She's carrying a sword and she knows how to use it. She's not a child. She's a survivor who happens to be 11. She shouldn't have to survive. Nobody should have to survive. Survival is the thing that happens when the world fails to provide anything better. Ned held this. The burned man's philosophy, not a philosophy exactly, the anti-philosophy, the rejection of the systems and the principles and the pretty words that the world used to organize itself, the rejection based on the evidence that the systems and the principles and the pretty words had produced the world that was burning and killing and executing good men on the steps of septs. "Thank you," Ned said, "for stopping the execution. I told you, don't make it noble. I'm not making it noble, I'm thanking you. The thanking makes it noble. The thanking makes it polite. Polite is noble with better manners. Clegane, Stark. Let me thank you. Fine, you're welcome. Now stop." Stopped. Good. The fire crackled. The road was dark. The three travelers, the hound, the wolf, the pup, sat in the firelight and held the silence that was not comfortable and not hostile, but was, after 2 days of walking and arguing and the slow process of three incompatible people learning to share space, something approaching the thing that people called understanding, not friendship. The hound did not have friends. Ned did not befriend killers. Understanding. The recognition that the other person was not what the world's categories said they were. That the burned man was not merely a killer, and the Northern Lord was not merely a fool, and the 11-year-old was not merely a child. The understanding was the beginning. Yours. The river, the fight that proved the hound. The 7th day. What Ned carried from the dungeon. On the 7th day, Ned collapsed. Not dramatically, the northern collapse, which was the body's quiet failure rather than the southern collapse's theatrical falling. Ned's legs stopped working. The muscles, weakened by weeks of dungeon, strained by 7 days of walking, pushed beyond the limit that the body could sustain. Ned's legs failed at a crossroads, and the failing was the body's announcement that the body was done. "Get up," the hound said. "I can't." "Get up." "I said I can't. The legs work, or the legs are carried." "Which?" Ned looked at the hound. The burned man standing over the fallen lord, the massive body, looking down at the weakened body, with the expression that was not sympathy. The hound did not do sympathy, but assessment, the hound's constant mode of processing the world. "Carried," Ned said. The admission that was the hardest admission the Northern Lord had ever made, harder than the confession on the steps of Baelor's sept, harder than the admission of treason that the Lannisters had extracted, the admission of physical weakness, the Lord's body failing, the warrior's frame broken by the dungeon. The hound carried Ned. Not gently, the hound picked up the Lord of Winterfell, the way a man picked up a sack of grain, the arm under the shoulders, the lift that was efficient rather than careful. The hound carried Ned over one shoulder with the ease that the hound's enormous body made possible, and with the indignity that the carrying required. This is, don't say undignified. I've already heard it. I was going to say uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is better than dead. Dead is the alternative. Arya walked beside the hound, the girl looking up at her father draped over the burned man's shoulder, the image that was simultaneously ridiculous, the Lord of Winterfell carried like a grain sack, and moving, the burned man carrying the Lord because the Lord could not carry himself. "He carried you out of King's Landing too," Arya said. "I was walking in King's Landing." "You were stumbling. He was holding your arm and you were stumbling, and he was the reason you made it to the gate. I made it to the gate on my own feet. Your own feet, guided by his arm. The girl's right, Stark. You've been a burden since the Sept. A burden you chose. A burden I'm carrying. The choosing and the carrying are both. The Hound carried Ned for 3 miles. 3 miles of the burned man's shoulders, bearing the Northern Lord's weight. The physical expression of the rescue that had started on the steps of Baelor's Sept, and that was continuing on the roads of the Riverlands. They stopped at a farmhouse. Abandoned, the war had driven the farmers from the land. The Lannister raids, producing the evacuations that turned farmhouses into shelters for the displaced and the fugitive. The farmhouse was empty. The farmhouse had a bed. The bed was the first surface that was not the ground that Ned had slept on since the dungeon. "Rest," the Hound said. "We need to keep moving. We need you alive at the other end. Dead lords don't reunite with sons. Rest." Ned rested. The Lord in the bed. The burned man at the door. The guard. The watch. The protector that the Hound denied being and that the Hound was being anyway. The contradiction between the Hound's words and the Hound's actions that was the Hound's defining characteristic. Arya sat with her father, the daughter beside the bed. The girl who had been fierce and angry and strong on the road, now being the other thing. The child, the 11-year-old sitting beside her father and holding her father's hand because the holding was the thing that the fierce girl did when the fierceness was not required. "Does it hurt?" Arya said. "Not badly." Liar. "It hurts, but the hurting means I'm alive. Dead men don't hurt. The Hound says dead men are the only men who don't complain. The Hound is full of wisdom disguised as rudeness. Don't tell him that. He'll be insufferable. He's already insufferable. I know." The laughter. The father and the daughter laughing in a farmhouse in the Riverlands while a burned man guarded the door. The laughter that was the thing the dungeon had not destroyed and that the road had not prevented, and that was, in the absurdity of the situation, the most human sound in the war. The 10th day, what the Riverlands looked like. On the 10th day, they passed through a village that the war had broken. The village had no name, or rather, the village had a name that nobody remembered because the remembering required inhabitants, and the inhabitants were gone. The Lannister raids had emptied the village. The houses were burned. The Sept was burned. The fields, the autumn harvest that should have been standing in golden rows. The fields were ash. Arya walked through the village in silence. The girl who talked constantly, who argued with the Hound, who questioned Ned, who filled the road's silence with the 11-year-old's running commentary on the world's injustice. Arya was silent in the village because the village was the thing that silenced commentary. "Who did this?" Arya said. "At the village's centre. The burned-out square where the well had been, and where the well was now filled with debris, and the debris included things that Arya could not identify, and that Ned moved to block from Arya's sight. "Lannisters," the Hound said. "Which Lannisters? Does it matter? The Mountain. The Raiders. The men Tywin sends to burn the places that Tywin wants burned. The specific hands don't matter. The order matters. The order is Tywin's. The order is always Tywin's. The hands change. The Mountain. The brave companions. The sellswords. The hands are the instruments. Tywin is the musician. That's the first metaphor I've heard you use. Don't get used to it." Ned looked at the village. The Lord of Winterfell, the man who had governed the largest territory in the 7 kingdoms, looking at the consequences of the war that his honesty had helped start. Not caused. The war's causes were older than Ned's investigation, older than the incest, as old as the Lannister ambition that had positioned Cersei beside Robert. But helped. Ned's investigation had been the spark. The spark had produced the fire. The fire had produced this village. This is what war looks like, Ned said. To nobody. To the village. To the ashes. This is what war looks like for the people who aren't in the castles, the Hound said. The lords fight. The common people burn. The burning is the thing the lords don't see, because the lords are in the castles where the burning doesn't reach. I see it. You see it now. You see it because you're on the road instead of in the castle. The road shows the things the castle hides. Is that why you prefer the road? I prefer the road because the road is honest. The castle is performance. The council is performance. The court is performance. The road is the thing that doesn't pretend. The road shows you the village. The castle shows you the map. The village and the map are different things. Ned held the Hound's words. The philosophy, not the academic philosophy of Meisters, but the ground-level philosophy of a man who had walked the roads and seen the villages, and who understood, through the seeing, the thing that the lords in the castles did not understand, that the war's cost was measured in villages, not in battles. We'll rebuild, Ned said. Will you? When the war is over, we'll rebuild. The lords always say they'll rebuild. The lords rarely do. I'm not most lords. No, you're not. The Hound looked at Ned, the burned face. The assessment that was not the cynical assessment of a man who had given up on lords, but the cautious assessment of a man who was considering the possibility that this lord might be different. You're the lord who almost died for the truth. That's different. Different enough? Different enough for me to wait and see. They walked through the village and out the other side, and the village was behind them, and the road was ahead, and the road was the thing that continued, regardless of the villages it passed through. Ned recovered. Not fully. Full recovery would take weeks, the body rebuilding from the dungeon's damage through the slow process that bodies used to rebuild. But enough. Enough to walk the next day. Enough to carry his own weight. Enough to be the lord, rather than the burden. The Hound did not mention the carrying again. The carrying was the thing the Hound had done, and that the Hound would not discuss, because discussing the carrying would require acknowledging the carrying, and acknowledging the carrying would require admitting that the carrying was care, and care was the thing the Hound did not admit. They were found on the 8th day. Not by the Lannisters, by the brave companions. Vargo Hote's Sellsword Company, the mercenary band that was operating in the Riverlands with the indiscriminate violence that sellswords brought to every war they participated in. The brave companions were not looking for Ned Stark. The brave companions were looking for profit. And 3 travellers on the King's Road, one of whom was wearing clothes that said, Lord, even though the clothes were dirty, 3 travellers were the kind of profit that sellswords recognised. There were 6 of them, 6 sellswords against the Hound, and a weakened lord, and a girl with a very small sword. The Hound fought. The fighting was the thing the Hound was built for, the activity that the Hound's body and the Hound's training and the Hound's 30 years of violence had produced. The Hound fought the way the Hound did everything, without elegance, without mercy, without the pretty footwork that knights used in tournaments, and that real fighters discarded in the first heartbeat of a real fight. The Hound killed the first 2 in 4 seconds. The bastard sword, the Hound's weapon, the blade that was too large for most men, and that was the correct size for the Hound's enormous hands. The bastard sword took the first sellsword across the throat and the second sellsword through the chest. The speed was the Hound's signature, the impossible quickness that lived inside the massive body, the contradiction that had kept the Hound alive for 30 years. The third sellsword tried to flank. Arya stopped him. Needle, the thin sword. the blade that Jon Snow had given his sister in Winterfell, the sword that was named after a sewing implement, and that was, in Arya's hands, the weapon that Syrio Forel had trained the girl to use. Arya did not kill the sellsword. Arya stuck needle into the sellsword's thigh, the water dance's targeting, the precise thrust that Syrio had taught and that Arya executed with the natural skill that the teaching had uncovered. The sellsword fell, the thigh wound, not lethal, but disabling. The man on the ground, the fight, removed from the man's capacity. The Hound killed the fourth and fifth. The fighting was brutal. The Hound did not fight clean. The Hound fought dirty, the way real fighters fought when the fighting was not a performance but a survival mechanism. The Hound used the sword and the fists and the boots and the headbutt that the fourth sellsword did not expect, and that broke the fourth sellsword's nose and the consciousness behind it. The sixth sellsword ran. The running was the smart thing. The assessment of a man who had watched the Hound kill 4 of his companions in less than a minute, and who had correctly calculated that the running's survival probability was higher than the fighting's. The Hound let the runner go. "Why?" Ned said. After the fight. The King's Road quiet again. The bodies on the ground. The blood on the stone. "Because chasing him means leaving you, and the girl unguarded, and unguarded is the thing that gets you killed. He'll tell the Lannisters where we are. He'll tell the Lannisters where we were. By the time the telling reaches the Lannisters, we'll be 20 miles north. The telling is yesterday's intelligence. Yesterday's intelligence is useless intelligence. You think like a soldier. I think like a man who's been fighting since I was 12, and who's learned that the thinking is the thing that keeps you alive between the fighting." Ned looked at the Hound, the burned face, the sword arm, still dripping blood. The man who had just killed 4 men in a minute, and who was now analyzing the tactical implications of the 6th man's escape with the calm assessment of a military mind. "You're better than they say," Ned said. "They say I'm a dog. You're better than a dog. Don't tell anyone. Ruins the reputation." Arya cleaned needle. The blood, the first blood the sword had drawn in combat. The girl cleaning the blade with the care that Jon had taught her, the ritual that said, "The sword is maintained because the sword is the thing that keeps you alive." "I stuck him," Arya said. "You stuck him," the Hound confirmed, "in the thigh, like Syrio taught. Your Bravosi dancing master. He was better than you." "He's dead. I'm not. Draw your own conclusions." That's not how. It's exactly how. The best fighter is the one still standing. The rest is commentary." The Hound and the girl. What grew between them. After the sellsword fight, something changed between the Hound and Arya. Not friendship. The Hound did not do friendship, and Arya was too angry for friendship. Something else. The thing that happened between 2 people who had fought together. The combat bond. The connection that was not emotional, but physical. The shared experience of violence producing the trust that shared meals and shared roads could not produce. Arya had stuck a man with needle. The Hound had watched. The Hound had not interfered, had not stepped in to protect, had not shouted a warning, had not done the things that protectors did when children were in danger. The Hound had watched Arya fight, and the watching was the respect. The recognition that the girl was not a child to be shielded, but a fighter to be assessed. The assessment was, she was good. Not skilled. The skill was raw. The Bravosi footwork rough. The targeting imprecise. The thigh was not the ideal target. The thigh was the target of a fighter whose reach was too short for the torso. But good. The natural talent that training would refine, and that the Hound, despite every protestation that he wasn't a teacher, was beginning to refine. "You stabbed him too deep," the Hound said, the morning after the fight, walking, the road stretching north. "I stabbed him. You stabbed him too deep. The blade went in 4 inches. 2 inches disables. 4 inches risks the blade getting stuck. A stuck blade is a dead fighter. I'm alive. You're alive because there were only 6 of them, and I killed 4. If there had been 12 and you'd gotten needles stuck in a thigh, you'd be dead. Then I won't stab too deep. You'll stab exactly as deep as the target requires. The thigh, 2 inches. The armpit, 3 inches. The throat, 1 inch. The eye. Depends on how much you want to see what's behind the eye. That's disgusting. That's survival. Survival is disgusting. That's why it works. Arya absorbed. The way Arya absorbed everything, through the body, rather than the mind, the physical learning that was the girl's gift. The Hound's instructions went into Arya's body, the same way Sirio's instructions had gone into Arya's body, directly, without the intermediary of intellectual processing. You're teaching me, Arya said. I'm correcting your mistakes. Teaching implies I care whether you learn. You care. I care about having a functional second fighter on the road. Your learning is a byproduct of my self-interest. That's the most dishonest, honest thing you've ever said. Don't get clever with me, girl. I'm already clever. You're just noticing. The Hound looked at Arya. The girl, the small, fierce, dirty, brilliant girl who was becoming on the road the thing that the Hound had not expected. A presence. Not a burden. Not a responsibility. A presence. The person whose fierceness matched the Hound's ferocity. The small version of the large thing. The wolf pup whose teeth were growing. You're on my list, Arya said. I know. For Micah. I know. I haven't taken you off. I haven't asked you to. Good. Good. The list. The thing between them. The dead boy, the horse, the killing that the Hound carried and that Arya did not forgive. The list was the barrier. The barrier was the thing that prevented the bond from becoming the thing that bonds became when the barrier was absent. Love. The barrier held. The bond grew around the barrier, the way a tree grew around a fence, incorporating the obstacle, adapting to the shape, producing the growth that was neither the tree nor the fence but the thing that the two produced together. The Hound and the girl walked north. The burned man and the wolf pup. The teacher who denied teaching and the student who denied learning. The protector who denied protecting and the protected who denied needing protection. They walked north, past the bodies, past the blood, into the riverlands that were burning and into the war that was waiting and into the future that the Hound's moment of disgust on the steps of Baelor's Sept had created. Robb. What the sun heard. Robb Stark received the Raven at River Run. The Raven was not from King's Landing. The ravens from King's Landing were the official communications, the Lannister-controlled messages that said what the Lannisters wanted, said. This raven was from one of Varys's birds, the Spider's network, the intelligence apparatus that operated independently of the crown, and that was, for its own purposes, providing the Northern Army with the information that the Northern Army needed. The raven said, Ned Stark, alive, escaped execution, travelling north with Sandor Clegane and Arya Stark, Lannister, pursuit active. Robb read the raven 3 times. Alive, Robb said. To the tent, to the war council, Catelyn, the Blackfish, the Greatjon, the assembled lords of the north and the Riverlands. My father is alive. The council erupted, not the northern eruption of silence and assessment, the eruption of hope. The noise that men made when the thing they were fighting for changed from grief to possibility, the sound that transformed a war of vengeance into a war of rescue. The Hound, Catelyn said, reading the raven. The mother's mind. Not the political mind. Not the strategic mind. The mother's mind, processing the fact that her husband and her daughter were alive, and were being protected by a man whose reputation was the opposite of protection. The Hound is with them. Sandor Clegane saved father at the execution. Sandor Clegane is a killer. Sandor Clegane is the man who saved my father's life. The killing and the saving they're both true, Mother. Both. And Arya? Arya is with them. The Raven says Arya is with father and the Hound. Catelyn held the information. The husband alive. The daughter found. The impossible combination of relief and terror that the information produced. Relief that they were alive. Terror that they were on the King's Road in the middle of a war with Lannister hunters behind them. We ride south, Robb said. We cannot ride south, the Blackfish said. The military assessment, the veteran commander's evaluation of the strategic situation. The army is here. The Lannisters are between us and your father. Riding south means engaging the Lannister forces in the Riverlands without preparation. My father is on the King's Road with a bounty on his head. Your father is on the King's Road with Sandor Clegane, who is the most dangerous man in the Seven Kingdoms who isn't his brother. Your father is protected. Protected is not rescued. Riding south recklessly is not rescuing either. The rescue requires planning. The planning requires time. If your father and the Hound can survive on the road, and the Hound can certainly survive on the road, the planning produces the rescue. Robb held the urgency against the planning. The king, the boy king, the young wolf who had been crowned in this hall and who was now facing the decision that tested the crowning. The son's impulse versus the king's discipline. Send a force south, Catelyn said. Not the army, a force, fast riders, men who can reach the King's Road and meet your father before the Lannisters find him. Who leads? Someone fast, someone who knows the Riverlands. I'll go, the Blackfish said. Uncle, I know the Riverlands, I know the roads. I can move fast with a small force. The army stays here under Robb's command. The rescue party moves south under mine. The plan was made. The Blackfish with 50 riders, fast, light. The rescue force that would ride south through the Riverlands to find Ned Stark and the Hound and bring them north to the army that was waiting. The plan was the thing that the other world had not produced, because in the other world, Ned was dead, and dead men did not need rescue parties. In this world, Ned was alive, and the alive changed everything. Sansa. What the hostage endured. Sansa Stark was still in King's Landing. The escape had left her behind, not by choice, by circumstance. The Hound's act had been impulsive, the escape improvised, and the improvisation had not included the girl who was in the Red Keep under Lannister guard. The escape had saved Ned and collected Arya and left Sansa in the cage. Sansa was the Lannisters' hostage, the only Stark in King's Landing, the only leverage the crown possessed over the family that was marching south with 20,000 swords. Joffrey used the hostage. Your father is a traitor and a coward, Joffrey said, to Sansa. In the throne room, the Boy King's performance, the cruelty that Joffrey performed for the court's audience, the viciousness that was not governance but entertainment, the king who confused the court's fear with the court's respect. My father is... Your father ran like a coward. With my dog. My dog betrayed me, and your father ran, and you're still here because you're the only Stark stupid enough to get caught. Sansa held the composure. The Sansa composure. Not the northern composure of silence and stone, but the southern composure of courtesy and performance. The lady's armor that Sansa had been building since she arrived in King's Landing. And that was now, in the throne room, the only thing between Sansa and the Boy King's cruelty. I am loyal to the crown, Your Grace. You're loyal to your family. Your family is full of traitors. I am loyal to the crown. The words were the shield. The words were the performance that Sansa had learned to deliver. The courtesy that was not agreement but survival. The diplomatic language that said what the king wanted to hear, while the mind behind the language said something different. Tyrion intervened. The imp, the small man with the large mind, the Lannister who was not like the other Lannisters, because the other Lannisters were beautiful, and Tyrion was not, and the not beautiful had produced the compensating intelligence that was the sharpest mind in the capital. "The girl is more useful alive and unharmed," Tyrion said. To Joffrey, in the council. "The Starks will negotiate for her return. Negotiation requires a living hostage. A dead hostage is, 'I didn't say I was going to kill her.' You're tormenting her. Torment that reaches the northern camp through ravens and rumors produces. Produces what? Produces rage. Rage that a father feels when he learns that his daughter is being tormented. Rage that a brother feels when the reports arrive. The rage produces." Tyrion paused. The calculation. "The rage produces the kind of fighting that costs us men we can't afford to lose. The Starks should be afraid of me. The Starks should be cautious of us. Fear and caution are different things. Fear produces desperate action. Caution produces negotiation. We want negotiation." Joffrey held the assessment, the Boy King processing the advice through the filter of the Boy King's ego, the filter that rejected everything that didn't make Joffrey feel powerful, and that was now, with Tyrion's advice, struggling against the logic that even Joffrey's ego could not entirely reject. "Fine," Joffrey said. "The girl lives. For now. For now is all I'm asking." Sansa survived. She survived through the things her mother had taught her, the courtesies, the manners, the ladies' training that had seemed in Winterfell like the most useless education a girl could receive, and that was now, in King's Landing, the armor that kept the girl alive. She wrote letters. To Robb. To Catelyn. To Ned. The letters were censored. The Lannisters read every word. The letters that left the Red Keep carrying only the information that the Lannisters permitted. But the letters were communication. The thread that connected the hostage to the family. The proof that Sansa was alive, and that the alive was, despite the court's cruelty, holding. Tyrion was the protector she did not expect. The imp, the small man who had arrived in King's Landing to manage the crisis that his family had created. Tyrion looked at Sansa and saw the thing that Tyrion always saw in the powerless. Himself. The dwarf whose family had treated him as a shame, looking at the girl whose captors treated her as a tool. The recognition was the connection. The connection was the protection. "Joffrey wants to show her the heads," Tyrion said to Cersei, after a particularly vicious court session where the Boy King had described, in detail, what he intended to do to Sansa's father when the Hound was caught. "Joffrey says a lot of things. Joffrey says things and then does them. That's the difference between Joffrey and other boys who say cruel things. Other boys stop at the saying. Joffrey proceeds to the doing. I'll manage Joffrey. You've been managing Joffrey for 16 years. The managing has produced a monster. Perhaps a different approach. A different approach from my little brother who has no children. A different approach from your little brother who can see the situation from outside the family's self-congratulatory bubble. The girl is a hostage. Hostages have value. Value requires preservation. Joffrey is not preserving. Joffrey is degrading. The degradation reduces the value. The degradation keeps Joffrey occupied. The degradation teaches Joffrey that cruelty is governance. Cruelty is not governance. Cruelty is the thing that produces the kind of enemies who don't negotiate, they destroy. Cersei held the brothers' words. The words she would dismiss, because Cersei dismissed everything that Tyrion said, because dismissing Tyrion was the Cersei habit that years of resentment had produced. Tyrion protected Sansa anyway, not through grand gestures, through management. the imp managing Joffrey's access to the hostage, the small man standing between the monster and the girl with the diplomatic skill that was the only weapon the small man possessed. Sansa survived. Sansa survived through the courtesy and the performance and the daily discipline of a girl who had been taught to be a lady and who was now using the ladies' training as the survival mechanism that the ladies' training was always designed to be. Sansa survived because Sansa was a Stark, and Starks endured. The reunion. What happened when Ned reached his son? The 12th day. What the Hound said about night. On the 12th day, they passed a dead knight. The knight was in the road. Full plate, the armor that said, "This man was important. This man was someone. This man had the money for the metal and the training for the wearing and the status that the armor represented." The knight was dead. The armor was dented. The sword was broken. The man inside the armor was finished. Arya stopped. "Don't look," Ned said. "I've seen dead people." "You've seen dead sellswords. This is a knight." "Dead knights look the same as dead sellswords. The armor is shinier." The Hound knelt beside the body, not from reverence, from practical assessment. The Hound checking the body for useful things. Water, food, coin, the supplies that the dead did not need and that the living required. "Hedge Knight," the Hound said, reading the armor. The heraldry, a minor sigil, a house too small for the histories. Fought for hard to tell. The Riverlands are full of dead hedge knights. They come to the war for the glory, and the glory kills them, and the dying is the thing the songs don't mention. "You hate knights," Arya said. "I hate the word. The word knight is the word that makes killing sound noble. Knights kill. That's what knights do. They kill people. The word knight is the fancy wrapping that the killing comes in. Take away the wrapping and the knight is a man with a sword who kills other men. Same as me. Same as every sellsword. The difference is the ceremony, and the ceremony is the lie. Not all knights are. Name one. Name one knight who lived up to the word. One knight who was noble, honourable, the thing the ceremony promises," Arya thought. "Barristan Selmy. Barristan Selmy served the Mad King. The Mad King burned people alive. Selmy stood beside the burning and did nothing because the standing was the duty, and the duty was the ceremony." Sir Arthur Dayne. Arthur Dayne was the finest swordsman in history, and Arthur Dayne guarded a tower where a woman was dying because guarding was the order, and the order was more important than the woman. There must be nothing. The ceremony is the lie. The lie is the thing I refuse. The refusing is. The Hound stood, away from the dead knight, away from the armor and the broken sword and the minor sigil that nobody would remember. The refusing is the thing that people call dishonor. I call it seeing. I see the lie. The knights don't. The knights believe the ceremony, and the believing is the thing that makes them stand beside burning kings and dying women and call the standing duty. "You stood beside Joffrey," the words landed. The girl's words, the accusation that was the same accusation the Hound had just made about every knight in history, turned back on the Hound himself. The Hound had stood beside Joffrey. The Hound had served the vicious boy. The Hound had been the thing the Hound accused the knights of being, the man who stood beside the wrong and called it duty. "I did," the Hound said. The admission without defense. The honesty that was the Hound's single principle applied to the Hound's own failure. "I stood beside the boy king, and I called it service, and the calling was the lie. The same lie, the same ceremony, the same standing. Until you didn't. until I didn't, until the steps, until the moment when the lie was too large for the standing. So you do understand. The night, the standing, I understand the failing. The failing is universal. Knights fail, dogs fail. The difference is, when the dog fails, the dog admits the failing. The knight tells himself a story about duty. They walked past the dead knight, the body in the road, the armor shining in the autumn light, the man inside the armor dead because the man had believed in the word and the word had not protected the man from the sword. The hound did not believe in the word. The hound believed in the sword. And the sword, the 3 steps, the clash on the steps of Baelor's sept, the moment when the sword had been aimed not at duty but at the truth. The sword had saved a man that the word had condemned. They met the Blackfish's riders on the 14th day. 14 days on the road, 14 days of walking and hiding, and the hound's navigation, and Arya's fierce companionship, and Ned's slow recovery from the dungeon's damage. 14 days that had transformed the 3 travelers from a group into a unit, the burned man and the northern lord and the girl who had stopped being strangers and had become, through the road's pressure, something that did not have a name. The Blackfish's riders found them at the Crossroads Inn, the junction of the King's Road and the River Road, the geographic point where the paths of the realm converged. Lord Stark, the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, Catelyn's uncle, the veteran commander who had ridden south with 50 men and who was now looking at the man he had been sent to find and who was alive. Thin, weak, but alive. Blackfish, you look terrible. I've been in a dungeon and almost executed and walked 300 miles with a man who insults me constantly. Terrible is an improvement. The Blackfish looked at the hound. The burned man. The assessment. The military man's evaluation of the warrior. The competence check that the Blackfish applied to everyone. Sandor Clegane. Tully, you saved my nephew. I stopped a killing. Everyone keeps saying, saved. I stopped a killing. The distinction is meaningful to you. The distinction is the difference between a hero and a man who did a thing. I'm the man who did a thing. The thing saved a Lord Paramount, prevented a political execution, and changed the course of a war. The thing was 3 steps and a sword swing. The consequences are not my fault. The Blackfish almost smiled. The almost. The warrior's recognition of a man who was deflecting praise with the same skill that other men deflected swords. Can you fight? I just killed 4 sellswords in a minute. I meant, can you fight for us? I'm not fighting for anyone. I'm fighting against the people who want me dead. The Lannisters want me dead. You're fighting the Lannisters. The math works. That's the most honest declaration of allegiance I've ever heard. Allegiance is a big word. I'm available. Use me or don't. The Blackfish used him. The riders turned north. The rescue party now expanded to include the rescued, riding toward River Run and Robb's army and the reunion that 14 days on the road had been building toward. They reached River Run in 4 days. Robb met them at the gate, the son and the father, the king in the north and the lord of Winterfell, the boy who had been crowned in grief and the man who was supposed to be dead and who was instead standing in the courtyard of River Run, thin and weak and alive. Robb embraced Ned. The embrace was not the king's embrace, not the formal, public, political greeting that kings gave lords. The embrace was the son's embrace, the boy holding his father, the grip that was too tight and too long and that contained the thing that words could not contain, the relief, the enormous, crushing, overwhelming relief of a son who had believed his father was dead and who was now holding his father and feeling the heartbeat that said, alive. still alive, despite everything. Father, Robb, you're alive. I'm alive. The Hound. The Hound saved my life. Whatever the world says about Sandor Clegane, the man saved my life. Robb looked at the Hound. The burned man standing in the courtyard, the massive body awkward in the way that the Hound's body was always awkward in situations that were not violent. The warrior in a peaceful setting, the blade in the sheath. Thank you, Robb said. Don't thank you. I'm the king in the north and I'm thanking you. Accept the thanks. Fine. You're welcome. Can I have some wine? You can have whatever you want. Wine. That's all I want. Wine and a place to sleep that isn't the ground. The Hound was given wine. The Hound was given quarters. The Hound was given the thing that the Hound had not had since the steps of Baelor's Sept. A place. Not a home. The Hound did not have a home. A place. The difference was the thing that the Hound understood and that the world usually did not. A home was where you belonged. A place was where you were allowed to be. The Hound did not belong at Riverrun. The Hound was allowed to be at Riverrun. The allowing was enough. Catelyn embraced Ned. The embrace was the thing that the war had been preventing, the wife holding the husband who should have been dead. The arms that had held 5 children, now holding the man who had given her those children. The embrace that was not political, not strategic, not the public performance of a relationship. The embrace that was 2 people who loved each other and who had been separated by a war and a dungeon and an execution and a road, and who were now in a courtyard in the Riverlands together. Don't ever go south again, Catelyn said, into his shoulder. I'm not planning to. You weren't planning to last time either. Last time I was an idiot who listened to a king. This time I'm an idiot who's learned. The learning took too long. The learning always takes too long. Catelyn pulled back. She looked at him, the face, thinner, older, the dungeon's damage visible in the hollowed cheeks, and the grey that had appeared at the temples, and the eyes that were Ned's eyes, but that were different now. The eyes of a man who had knelt on the steps of a sept and accepted death, and who had been pulled back from the accepting by a burned man's sword. You need food, Catelyn said. I've been eating rabbit for 2 weeks. You need real food. Bread, soup, meat that isn't charred rabbit cooked by a man who considers seasoning a personal weakness. Exactly that. She held his hand. She held his hand through the gate. She held his hand through the hall. She held his hand because the holding was the thing that said, I have you. I have you back. The having is the thing I will not let go. The Hound watched the reunion from across the courtyard. The burned man standing in the shadow of the wall, the massive body occupying the space that was neither inside nor outside, the position that the Hound occupied in every setting, the edge, the periphery, the place where a man could see everything and be part of nothing. The Hound watched the wife embrace the husband. The Hound watched the son embrace the father. The Hound watched the daughter reunite with the mother. The Hound watched the family reassemble, the pieces coming together, the people finding each other, the love that the war had scattered being collected in a courtyard. The Hound did not have a family. The Hound had a brother who had burned him, and a father who had permitted the burning, and a life that had been defined by the absence of the things he was watching. The watching was the thing the Hound carried alongside the other things. The burns, the kills, the dead butcher's boy. The watching of a family that worked, observed by a man whose family had not. You look like you want to hit something, Arya said, appearing beside the Hound. The girl whose ability to appear silently was the water dancer's gift and the annoying girl's habit. I always look like I want to hit something. This is different. It's not different. You're watching them. I'm standing in a courtyard. The standing includes the watching. You're watching them and I'm what? Sad. The word. The girl's word. The 11-year-old's assessment of the emotion that the girl had identified on the burned man's face. The word that the Hound would have denied if the denying would have been convincing, and that the Hound did not deny, because the denying would not have been convincing, because the girl was right. I'm not sad. You are. Drop it. No. Drop it, girl. You saved my father. You carried him out of the city. You walked 300 miles and fought sellswords and taught me sword things as you pretend you didn't teach me. And now, you're standing in a corner, watching my family hug each other, and you're sad because you don't have the thing you're watching. I said drop it. Fine. I'll drop it. Arya stood beside the Hound, the girl beside the burned man, the wolf pup beside the scarred dog. But I'm standing here. Stand where you want. I'm standing here. Beside you. Because, Arya stopped. The girl's composure, not the Tully composure, not the Stark composure. Arya's composure, which was the fierce refusal to show the soft thing underneath the fierce thing. Because you shouldn't have to stand in corners alone. The Hound held this. The girl's words. The girl's presence. The small body beside the large body. The wolf pup standing beside the burned dog because the wolf pup had decided that the burned dog deserved company. You're still on my list, Arya said. I know. But you can be on my list and still be someone I stand beside. That's the most confusing thing anyone has ever said to me. Get used to it. I'm confusing. You're 11. I'm 11 and confusing. Both. The Hound did not smile. The Hound did not do smiling. But the burned face did a thing that wasn't smiling, but that was not smiling. The thing that the burned muscles could produce when the burned muscles were trying to express something that the burned muscles had not expressed in years. Catelyn embraced Ned, the wife and the husband. The reunion that the war had been building toward. Not the war of the 5 kings, but the private war. The personal war. The war of a family that had been torn apart by the South, and that was now, in a courtyard in the Riverlands, partially reassembled. You're thin, Catelyn said. The dungeon was not generous with the portions. You're thin, and you look terrible, and you're alive, and the alive is the Tully composure, the wall, the naming. The alive is everything. The alive is everything. Arya embraced Catelyn, the wild daughter, the girl who had been lost and who was now found. The mother holding the daughter who had been in the streets of King's Landing, dressed as a boy with a sword and a kill list, and the fierceness that was Arya's, and that was, Catelyn now realized, the fierceness that had kept the girl alive. You're filthy, Catelyn said. I've been on the road for 2 weeks. You smell like the road. The road smells like the road. Bath, now. Mother. Bath, now. Arya bathed. Because Catelyn's voice was the voice that even Arya's fierceness could not resist. The reunion was complete. Partial. Sansa was still in King's Landing. Bran and Rickon were at Winterfell. The family was scattered across the realm. But the reunion was real. Ned was alive. Arya was found. Robb was king. Catelyn was managing. The Starks were, not whole, but present. Together. In the same castle. Fighting the same war. The question, what to do with the Hound. That night, After the reunions and the embraces, and Arya's grudging bath, Robb and Ned sat in the solar and addressed the question that the reunion had created: what to do with Sandor Clegane. "He can't stay here without a role," Robb said. "The Lords need a category: knight, bannerman, sworn sword. Something that gives the Hound a title the Lords can understand. The Hound won't accept a title. The Hound won't accept a knighthood. A title is different. Is it? The Hound's objection is to the ceremony. All titles are ceremonies. The title says, this man has a place. The Hound's entire identity is built on not having a place. Then we create a place that doesn't look like a place. What does that look like? It looks like Arya's protector, not officially, not titled. The man who walks beside my sister because the walking beside is the thing the man does, and the thing the man does serves the family." Ned held this: the son's assessment, the king's assessment of the burned man's role, the pragmatic solution that honored the Hound's refusal of ceremony while creating the function that the Hound was already performing. You want to assign the Hound to Arya without calling it an assignment. I want to formalize what already exists without using the word formal. The Hound protects Arya. Everyone knows it. The knowing doesn't need a ceremony. The knowing needs an acknowledgement. Then I'll acknowledge it, privately, to the Hound, without the ceremony. He'll deny it. He denies everything. The denial is the acceptance. With the Hound, the denial is the ceremony. Ned almost smiled. The son who had learned, in the months of war, the thing that the father had not taught and that the war had taught instead: the management of men who did not want to be managed. "There's another question," Ned said. "The future, after the war. If we win, when we win, what happens to the Hound?" "What do you mean?" "The Hound is a man without a home, without a house, without lands or title or the framework that Westerosi society provides for men of his skill. After the war, the fighting stops. The Hound's value is the fighting. Without the fighting, the Hound needs something else. Something else that isn't fighting and isn't ceremony and isn't the things that the Hound rejects. A place. A place that doesn't look like a place. We'll find it. We'll find it after the war, when the finding is possible. The finding was the future. The future was the thing that the present's fighting was designed to produce: the world after the war, the realm that the winning would create, the peace that would require its own kind of strength. The Hound's strength was the fighting. The Hound's other strength, the one the Hound denied, the one that Arya had identified and that Ned had recognized and that the road had proven, was the honesty. The honesty would serve the peace the way it had served the war, by seeing the things that the ceremony hid and by refusing to pretend that the hidden things were not there. The realm needed knights. The realm also needed the man who saw through the knight's armor and who said, the man inside the armor is the thing that matters, not the metal. The Hound was that man. The realm would find a use for him. The war that was about to change, because the man who was supposed to be dead was alive, and the man's survival was going to reshape everything. The war. What Ned's survival changed. Ned Stark's survival changed the war. Not because Ned was a military genius. Ned was not a military genius. Ned was a competent lord, a capable commander, a man who understood the North's military traditions and who had fought in Robert's rebellion with the unglamorous effectiveness that was the Stark signature. Ned's survival changed the war because Ned changed the war's politics. A war led by a boy king, Robb, 18, brilliant but young, was a war that the other factions assessed as temporary. the assumption being that the boy would make the boy's mistake, and the mistake would end the rebellion. A war that included the Boy King and the Boy King's father, Ned, the Lord of Winterfell, the Warden of the North, the man whose reputation was the most respected in the Seven Kingdoms, was a different war. A war with Ned Stark in it was a war with gravitas, with institutional weight, with the legitimacy that only a Lord Paramount's presence could provide. Your father's survival changes the calculation for every lord in the Riverlands, Catelyn said, in the War Council. The lords who were hesitant, the lords who were following Robb because Robb was winning but who had reservations about following a boy, the lords will follow Ned. Ned is the warden. Ned is the institution. I'm not, Ned began. You're not trying to take command, I know. But your presence gives the command legitimacy. Robb leads. You legitimize. The combination is stronger than either alone. The combination was tested immediately. Walder Frey, the Lord of the Twins, the Weasel Lord whose loyalty was transactional and whose transaction was always calculated to favor the Frey position, Walder Frey had been wavering. The Frey commitment to the Stark cause was based on Robb's military success and on the marriage arrangement, Robb's promise to marry a Frey daughter. The wavering was the Frey assessment. Was the Stark cause winning? If winning, stay. If losing, recalculate. Ned's arrival changed the Frey assessment. The Lord of Winterfell is alive, the Frey representative said, in the council. The weasel-faced man whose lord sat in his castle and calculated. Lord Frey notes the change. Lord Frey observes that the northern cause has gained substance. Substance, Robb said. Institutional substance. The Warden of the North is with the army. The legitimacy of the cause is enhanced. Lord Frey's support was not contingent on my father's survival. Lord Frey's support is contingent on Lord Frey's assessment of the cause's viability. The cause is more viable with the Warden alive. The Frey calculation was the war's barometer, the transaction that measured the Stark cause's temperature. The temperature had risen. Ned's survival was the heat source. But the heat created problems. Problem 1. Command. Robb was king. Ned was the father. The relationship between the king and the father was complicated. Robb had been crowned in Ned's absence. Robb had been governing the war in Ned's absence. Robb had been making the decisions that kings made, and the decisions had been good, mostly, and the governing had been effective, mostly. Ned's arrival raised the question, who commanded? You're the king, Ned said, to Robb, privately, in the tent, the father and the son, the conversation that had to happen before the council's next meeting. You're the warden. The warden serves the king. That's the arrangement. The king governs. The warden advises. I advise. Father, I'm not taking your crown, Robb. The crown is yours. You earned it. You won the battles. You managed the lords. You, Robb, you've done what I couldn't do. I couldn't survive King's Landing. You survived the war. The surviving is the qualification. The surviving is, Father, I barely survived. I made mistakes. You made decisions. Decisions are not mistakes unless the decisions produce disaster. Your decisions produced victories. The victories are yours. And now I'm your advisor, your father, Ned searched, your warden, the thing I was always supposed to be, the Northern Lord who served the man on the throne. The man on the throne is your son. Then the serving is easier, because I trust you. Robb held this. The father's assessment, the Lord's evaluation of the king, delivered not with the diplomat's calibration, but with the father's honesty, the trust, the word that contained the thing that Robb needed most, not the crown, but the confidence that the crown was deserved. Thank you, Robb said. Don't thank me. Govern. That sounds like something the Hound would say. The Hound and I have spent 2 weeks together. Some of his conversational style may have transferred. Problem 2. Sansa. Sansa was in King's Landing. Sansa was the hostage. Ned's survival had increased Sansa's value as a hostage because Ned alive was a Ned who would negotiate for his daughter's return. "We negotiate," Ned said. "At the council." "We don't negotiate with the Lannisters," the Great John said. The massive lord, whose position on all questions was, fight. "We negotiate because of the Lannisters. My daughter is in their hands. Every battle we win is a battle that increases the pressure on the hostage. If we push too hard, the Lannisters use Sansa. Then we push carefully. We push smart. The negotiation is not weakness. The negotiation is the strategy that retrieves my daughter while the fighting continues." "Your daughter, for what? What do the Lannisters want?" "The Lannisters want the war to stop. The war stops when we want it to stop, not before. But the negotiation creates the channel. The channel creates the possibility. The possibility of retrieving Sansa is the thing that the fighting alone cannot produce." The Council. What Ned brought to the table. With the first full war council with Ned present was the council that showed the Northern Lords what they had been missing. Robb was a brilliant tactician. The young wolf's ability to read battlefields and to produce the flanking movement or the night attack or the river crossing that won engagements. Robb's tactical brilliance was the thing that had won every battle the North had fought. Robb was not a political thinker. The politics, the alliances, the negotiations, the management of lords whose loyalty was conditional and whose conditions were constantly shifting. The politics were the thing that Robb's youth and temperament did not equip him for. Ned was a political thinker. Not a brilliant one. Ned's political mind was not Tywin's and was not Varys's and was not the kind of mind that produced the masterstrokes that the game's best players produced. But a competent one. A mind that understood the mechanics of Westerosi politics, the house loyalties, the succession laws, the regional grievances, the historical alliances that determine which lords would support, which causes under which conditions. "The Tyrells are the key," Ned said, at the first council. The lords assembled. Robb, Catelyn, the Blackfish, the Great John, Karstark, the Northern and River Lords. The Tyrells control the Reach. The Reach controls the grain. The grain feeds King's Landing. If we can bring the Tyrells into the Northern Alliance, or at minimum, prevent the Tyrells from joining the Lannister Alliance, the war's logistics shift in our favor. "The Tyrells are ambitious snakes," the Great John said. "The Tyrells are ambitious opportunists. Snakes and opportunists are different things. Snakes strike from malice. Opportunists strike from interest. Interest can be managed. How? By offering the Tyrells what the Tyrells want. The Tyrells want proximity to power. If we can offer proximity that outweighs the Lannister proximity, we offer them what? The Northern Crown? A marriage? A negotiation? The Tyrells negotiate. That's what the Reach does. The Reach has been negotiating its way through every war since the conquest. We open the channel. The channel produces the conversation. The conversation produces the possibility. That sounds like politics. That is politics. The war is fought with swords. The peace is fought with politics. If we want the peace to be ours, we need the politics. The lords processed. The processing was the Northern processing, the slow, skeptical absorption of information that was not military, the grudging recognition that the war required the thing that Northern lords found most uncomfortable: diplomacy. "Bolton is the other concern," Ned said. The name dropping into the council with the weight that the name always carried. The Dreadfort Lord, the calculating assessor, the man whose loyalty was conditional on the condition being favorable. "Bolton has been reliable," Robb said. "Bolton has been compliant. Reliable and compliant are different things. Reliable is a character trait. Compliant is a tactical position. Bolton's compliance is the compliance of a man who has determined that the Stark cause is currently winning." If the winning changes, Bolton defects. Bolton repositions. The repositioning looks like defection, but the mechanism is different. Bolton does not defect from loyalty. Bolton adjusts from one favorable position to another. The adjustment requires the favorable position to exist. We prevent the adjustment by ensuring that the Stark position remains the most favorable. How do we know Bolton's compliance is tactical? Because I've been watching Roose Bolton for 17 years. Bolton watches everyone. Bolton files everything. Bolton's loyalty is the loyalty of a man who has done the calculation and who will redo the calculation the moment the variables change. And the Mountain? The Blackfish said, the veteran commander whose strategic mind was the War Council's military foundation. Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides. He's in the Riverlands, burning, killing. The mountain is Tywin's instrument of terror. The Hound was in the corner. The burned man who attended the councils, not because the Hound wanted to attend, but because the councils discussed the fighting, and the fighting was the Hound's domain. The mountain is mine, the Hound said. The council turned. My brother. My problem. The mountain is a strategic asset deployed by Tywin Lannister, Ned said. The mountain is not a personal... My brother burned my face when I was 7. My brother is a monster that my father should have drowned at birth. My brother is in the Riverlands, killing people who can't fight back, because killing people who can't fight back is the only thing my brother is good at. The Hound's voice, low, controlled, the rage compressed beneath the surface like magma beneath rock. When the time comes, when the fighting reaches the mountain is mine. That's not negotiable. Clegane, not negotiable, Stark. Ned held the assessment. The burned man's claim, the brothers' demand, the personal vendetta that existed inside the military campaign, and that could not be separated from it because the personal and the military were, in the case of Gregor and Sandor Clegane, the same thing. When the time comes, Ned said, not before. When the time comes, not before. Ned's political mind, the mind that had governed the North for 17 years, the mind that had navigated King's Landing, poorly, but navigated, the mind that understood the distinction between fighting and governing. Ned's political mind was the thing that the War Council had been missing. Robb was brilliant at fighting. Ned was competent at politics. The combination was the thing that the other world had not produced. Because in the other world, Ned was dead, and the dead did not contribute political minds to war councils. The Hound, what the burned man became. The Hound did not fit at Riverrun. The Hound did not fit anywhere. Fitting was the thing that required the qualities that the Hound did not possess. Social grace, political awareness, the ability to be in a room without making every other person in the room uncomfortable. The Hound's presence at Riverrun was the presence of a weapon in a library, powerful, dangerous, and entirely inappropriate for the setting. The Northern Lords did not trust him. The man had been Joffrey's sworn shield. The man had been a Lannister dog. The man's presence in the Stark camp was the betrayal of a previous loyalty, and men who betrayed previous loyalties were men whose current loyalty was suspect. The Hound is a Lannister man, Rickard Karstark said, in the council. The lord whose distrust was loud, and whose loudness was the permission that other lords needed to express the distrust they were holding. The Hound saved my father's life, Robb said. The Hound saved your father's life for reasons the Hound won't explain. A man who does a good thing for unexplained reasons is a man whose reasons may not be good. The Hound's reasons are his own. The Hound's reasons should be the council's knowledge. The Hound attended the council. Not because the Hound wanted to attend. The Hound would have preferred to be anywhere else, including back on the steps of Baelor's Sept. The Hound attended because Robb asked, and because the asking was the king's prerogative, and because the Hound owed the king's family something that the Hound would not name, but that the owing required the attendance. Why did you save Ned Stark? Karstark asked. Directly. At the Hound, in the council. The Hound looked at Karstark. The burned face, the eyes, the Hound's eyes, which were the most dangerous thing about the Hound because the eyes held the intelligence that the burns distracted from, the mind that processed everything and revealed nothing. Because the killing was wrong. Wrong how? Wrong because the deal was the wall, and the boy broke the deal because the boy wanted to feel big. Wrong because a man who confesses should get the confession's reward. Wrong because... The Hound stopped. Not dramatically. Wrong because I was standing 3 feet from a man on his knees, and I'd been standing 3 feet from men on their knees my entire life, and I'd been watching the killing my entire life, and this was the killing I couldn't watch. That's not a reason. It's my reason. You want a better one? Find a better savior. The council needs a man who can fight. I can fight. The reasons are mine. The fighting is yours. Take the fighting and leave the reasons. Karstark held the assessment, the Lord evaluating the burned man, the discomfort of a northern lord accepting help from a Lannister defector, the political calculus of trust and utility, and the balance between the two. The fighting is accepted, Robb said. Before Karstark could respond, the king's authority, cutting through the council's debate. The Hound fights for the north. The reasons are his. The fighting is ours. The Hound fought for the north. Not as a knight, the Hound would not accept knighthood. Not as a lord, the Hound did not command lordship. As the thing the Hound had always been, a weapon, a sword arm. The burned man whose skill was killing, and whose killing was now directed at the Lannisters, rather than for them. The Green Fork. What the Hound did in battle. The Hound fought at the Battle of the Green Fork. The battle was Robb's, the young wolf's engagement against a Lannister force that was probing north through the Riverlands, the kind of mid-war battle that was not decisive, but that was necessary. The engagement that said, the North holds this ground. The Hound's role was not command. The Hound did not command because the Hound did not care about command. The Hound cared about fighting, and fighting was a personal activity, not an organizational one. The Hound's role was the vanguard, the front, the place where the fighting was loudest and the dying was quickest, and the skill of a single fighter could change the engagement's momentum. Robb put the Hound at the front because putting the Hound at the front was the only place the Hound would go. The vanguard, Robb said, before the battle, in the command tent, the king and the burned man. The vanguard takes the most casualties. The vanguard takes the most casualties because the vanguard meets the enemy first. Meeting the enemy first is the thing I'm good at. You could be more useful in a command. I'm not a commander, I'm a sword arm. Point me at the enemy and let me do the thing I do. The thing you do. Kill people. That's the thing. Don't dress it up. Robb did not dress it up. Robb pointed the Hound at the Lannister vanguard, and the pointing was the deployment, and the deployment was the thing that changed the battle. The Green Fork was a river battle. The engagement fought on the banks of the Green Fork of the Trident, the waterway that divided the Riverlands, and that was, for the purposes of the battle, the terrain that determined the fighting's shape. The Lannister force was crossing. The Northern force was defending. The engagement was the defense, the prevention of the crossing, the holding of the ford against the Lannister advance. The Hound held the ford. The holding was the thing that the Hound was built for, the physical presence at the point of maximum contact, the massive body and the massive sword occupying the space that the enemy needed and that the Hound denied. The ford was narrow, 30 feet of shallow water between two banks, the passage that the Lannisters needed and that the Hound defended. The Lannisters came in waves. The ford's narrowness channeled the attackers into a column, 3 men wide, the line that was the ford's capacity, and that was the Hound's advantage. 3 men wide meant 3 men at a time. 3 men at a time meant the Hound fought 3 men at a time. The Hound killed the first 3 in 10 seconds. The bastard sword, the heavy blade, The weapon that was too large for most men, the blade moved through the ford's water and the ford's attackers with the speed that was the Hound's signature. The first man lost his sword arm at the elbow. The second man lost his footing, the Hound's boot, planted in the man's chest, the kick that was as effective as the sword. The third man lost his nerve, the sight of the first two falling producing the hesitation that the Hound exploited with the forward lunge that ended the third man's participation. The fourth wave was larger. 5 men. The Lannisters adjusting, more bodies in the ford. The attempt to overwhelm the single defender through numbers rather than skill. The numbers did not work. Not because the Hound was invincible. The Hound was not invincible. The Hound took a cut on the left arm, a shallow wound, the kind that bled freely and healed quickly, and a bruise on the right shoulder, the shield block that absorbed the impact at the cost of the muscle. The numbers did not work because the ford was narrow, and the narrowness meant that the numbers could not deploy simultaneously, and the not deploying meant that the Hound fought the wave in sequence rather than in parallel. The Hound held the ford for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of fighting. 40 minutes of the narrow water, and the heavy sword, and the bodies in the river, and the blood that turned the Green Fork's water from green to red. 40 minutes of the single man holding the single point against the force that was trying to cross. The holding was not heroic. The holding was mechanical, the warrior's machine, the body performing the actions that the body had been trained to perform, the muscle memory that took over when the conscious mind was too occupied with survival to direct. The Hound fought at the ford the way the Hound did everything, without elegance, without mercy, with the brutal effectiveness that produced results and that produced the thing the Northern Lords had not expected. When the Hound stepped back from the ford, the relief force arriving, the fresh Northern soldiers replacing the single man who had held the crossing, the Hound was covered in blood, not all his, and sweat and the water of the Green Fork and the expression that was not triumph but exhaustion. 40 minutes, the Great John said, after the battle, in the camp, the massive lord looking at the burned man with the assessment that had shifted from suspicion to something else. 40 minutes on the ford, alone. Not alone. The ford was narrow. Narrow is the same as alone. You held the crossing. The crossing was narrow. A narrow crossing defends itself. I was the mechanism. You're the best fighter I've seen in 30 years of fighting. I'm a man who's good at a narrow thing. The narrow thing won the battle. The narrow thing held a ford. The battle was won by the army. The army is your boy King's. The winning is his. The Great John held the assessment that was shifting, the lord who had been suspicious of the Hound now recognizing the Hound's value, the competence overriding the distrust. Welcome to the North, Clegane. I'm not in the North, I'm in the Riverlands. The North is wherever Starks fight. And you're fighting where Starks fight. The fighting makes you Northern. Not the birth, the fighting. The North doesn't care where a man comes from. The North cares what a man does. And what you did, at the ford, at the Sept, on the road with the Stark Lord on your back, what you did is Northern enough for me, and Northern enough for Bear Island, and Northern enough for every lord who watched you hold that crossing for 40 minutes against men who wanted to kill you. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to cross the ford. I was in the way. Being in the way is the Northern way. That's the second most Northern thing anyone's ever said to me. What was the first? Welcome to the North. You said it 30 seconds ago. I'm full of Northern things today. You're full of something. The Great John laughed again. The umber laugh, the laugh that shook the tent. And that was, for the burned man who had never been welcomed anywhere, the sound of the thing the Hound would not name, and that the naming would have called belonging. That's the most Northern thing anyone's ever said to me. Get used to it. The Hound fought at the Battle of the Green Fork. The Hound fought in the skirmishes along the river road. The Hound fought with the ferocity that had made him the most feared fighter in the Seven Kingdoms, the violence that was not the mindless violence of a berserker, but the controlled, directed, purposeful violence of a man who had been fighting since childhood and who had learned that the fighting was the one thing he could do without shame. The Northern Lords watched. The Lords who had distrusted the Hound watched the Hound fight, and the watching produced the thing that fighting always produced. Respect, not trust. Respect was not trust. Respect was the acknowledgement of competence. Trust was the acknowledgement of character. The Hound had competence. The character was pending. The Hound at River Run. What a dog did in a wolf's castle. The Hound's daily life at River Run was the life of a man who did not belong and who was learning for the first time that not belonging was not the same as not welcome. The distinction mattered. In King's Landing, the Hound had belonged, the sworn shield, the position, the role, but had not been welcome, the burned face, the rough manner, the honesty that made courtiers uncomfortable. At River Run, the Hound did not belong, no oath, no position, no formal role, but was welcome, or at least tolerated, the tolerance being the northern version of welcome, the grudging acceptance that said, "You're here, you're useful, don't break anything." The Hound trained in the yard, every morning. The training was the Hound's ritual, the daily practice that maintained the body and the skill and the readiness that the fighting required. The training was also the Hound's social life, because the yard was the one place where the Hound's qualities, strength, speed, violence, were virtues rather than threats. Northern soldiers watched the Hound train. The watching was the assessment, the fighters evaluating the fighter, the warriors measuring the warrior. The measuring produced the respect that the council had not produced, because respect from fighters was earned through fighting, and the Hound's fighting was the thing that earned. "Spar with me," the Great John said. On the third morning, the massive lord, the only man in the camp whose size approached the Hound's, standing in the yard with a practice sword and the expression of a man who wanted to test the thing he had been watching. "You'll lose," the Hound said. "Probably. Spar anyway." They sparred. The Great John was strong. Umber strong. The physical power that the North's largest house produced in its largest lord. The Great John was not fast. The Great John's fighting style was the Northern style, direct, powerful, the hammer-blow approach that relied on strength rather than speed. The Hound was strong and fast. The combination was the thing that made the Hound, the speed inside the size, the quickness that had no right to exist in a body that large. The sparring lasted 3 minutes. The Great John was on his back in 3 minutes. The practice sword disarmed, the massive lord looking up at the burned man who had put him there. 3 minutes, the Great John said, from the ground. Could have been 2. I was being polite. You were being polite? That was polite. Northern polite. I'm learning. The Great John laughed. The umber laugh, enormous, wall-shaking, the laugh of a man who had been beaten and who found the beating funny because the Great John found everything funny that didn't kill him. I like you, Clegane. Don't say that. People who like me tend to what? Tend to be disappointed. I've been disappointed by better men than you. Welcome to the North. The sparring became routine. The Hound sparring with Northern soldiers, the daily practice that was also the daily integration, the fighting that was the language the Hound spoke, and that the Northerners understood because fighting was the North's primary language. Arya trained with the Hound. Not publicly, the training was private, in the yard at dawn before the soldiers arrived, the early morning sessions that the girl demanded and the Hound permitted, because the permitting was easier than the refusing. Arya's refusal to accept refusal being the thing that exhausted even the Hound's considerable stubbornness. "Wider," the Hound said, watching Arya's stance. "I'm wide." You're a girl's wide. I need a fighter's wide. I am a fighter. You're a fighter who's 11 and who weighs less than my sword arm. The width compensates for the weight. Wider. Arya widened, the stance adjusting, the Braavosi foundation accepting the Westerosi modification, the water dancer's grace incorporating the street fighter's stability. The combination was the thing the Hound was building, a style that was neither Braavosi nor Westerosi, but Arya's, the personal fighting form that the girl's body and the girl's training and the girl's nature were producing. Better? The Hound said. You said, better. That's the closest you've come to a compliment. Better is not a compliment. Better is a comparison to worse. You were worse. Now you're better. The better is improvement, not praise. You're impossible. I'm thorough. The distinction is important. Catelyn watched from the wall. The mother watching the burned man train her daughter. The observation that produced the assessment, the Tully assessment, the political and emotional evaluation that Catelyn applied to everything and everyone in her world. He's teaching her, Catelyn said. To Ned, on the wall. He denies it. He denies everything. The denial is the Hound's primary communication style. He denies the teaching while teaching. He denies the protecting while protecting. He denies the caring while caring. While caring, yes. The caring is real. The caring is as real as the burns, and the burns are the reason the caring is denied. Meaning the Hound learned as a child that caring produced vulnerability, and vulnerability produced burning. The denial of caring is the protection against the burning. The denial is the scar tissue, not on the face but on the heart. I was going to say on the instinct, but heart works too. Ned looked at Catelyn, the wife whose assessment was, as always, more perceptive than his own. The Tully mind that saw the emotional architecture that the Stark mind processed as fact. He's good with her, Ned said. He's terrible with her. He's rude and blunt and he insults her constantly. But the terrible is the protection, the roughness that disguises the tenderness. And Arya sees through the disguise because Arya has always seen through disguises. She still has him on her list. She'll always have him on her list. The list and the love they're not exclusive, Ned. The girl can hold the grudge and the gratitude simultaneously because the girl is 11 and 11-year-olds hold contradictions better than adults. You're remarkably calm about a killer training your daughter. The killer saved your life. The killer carried you 300 miles. The killer is training our daughter to survive. The calm is the response to the evidence. The Tully response, the mother's response, which happens to be Tully. The Hound's place at River Run solidified. Not through formal appointment, the Hound would not accept a title, would not accept a position, would not accept the framework that institutional inclusion required. The Hound's place solidified through practice, the daily presence, the daily training, the daily fighting that produced the daily recognition that the Hound was, despite every protestation, part of the thing he denied being part of. He's good, the Great John said, after the green fork, watching the Hound clean his sword. The burned dog is very, very good. He's the best fighter in this camp, Robb said. He might be the best fighter in the 7 kingdoms. Don't tell him that. He'll want more wine. The wine I can provide. The trust takes longer. The trust takes as long as it takes. In the meantime, point him at the Lannisters. The Hound was pointed at the Lannisters. The pointing was the thing the Hound understood. The direction, the target, the enemy, the politics and the trust and the complicated negotiations of loyalty were the things the Hound did not understand and did not want to understand. The Hound killed Lannisters. Bolton watched. Roose Bolton, the Lord of the Dreadfort, the pale-eyed lord whose loyalty was the loyalty of a man who had calculated that loyalty was currently profitable. Bolton watched the Hound, and Bolton watched Ned, and Bolton recalculated. In the other world, the world where Ned was dead, Bolton's calculation had been simple. The northern cause, led by a boy king, was strong but fragile. The fragility was the opportunity. The opportunity was the defection, the betrayal that would deliver the northern army to Tywin Lannister and that would deliver the north to Rose Bolton. In this world, the calculation was different. Ned was alive. Ned's presence changed the fragility. The boy king was now supported by the Lord Paramount, the institutional weight that made the northern cause less fragile and therefore less profitable to betray. The Stark cause is stronger, Bolton said. To nobody. In his tent. The pale eyes open in the dark, the mind working. The cause is stronger because the Lord is alive. The Lord's presence changes the calculation. Bolton did not defect. Not because Bolton was loyal, because Bolton was calculating, and the calculation said the Stark cause, with Ned alive, was the winning cause. The winning cause was the cause that Bolton supported, because supporting winning causes was Bolton's strategy, and the strategy did not change based on the specifics. But Bolton filed. Bolton filed the information for the day when the calculation changed, the day when the Stark cause weakened, the day when the opportunity returned. Bolton was patient. Bolton was always patient. He's watching, the Hound said. To Ned. In the camp. The burned man whose instinct for danger included the instinct for the quiet danger, the danger that didn't swing swords but sent ravens. Who? The pale one. Bolton. Bolton is a loyal bannerman. Bolton is a man who watches the way I watch. I watch for threats. Bolton watches for opportunities. Threats and opportunities are the same thing seen from different angles. You think Bolton is dangerous? I think Bolton is the man I would be if I were a lord instead of a dog. The difference is, I'm honest about the watching. Bolton pretends the watching is loyalty. Ned held the assessment. The Hound's assessment, the burned man's evaluation of the Pale Lord, the killer's recognition of the calculator. The Hound saw Bolton the way the Hound saw everything, through the filter of honesty. And the filter said, Bolton wasn't honest. And the not honest was the danger. I'll watch Bolton, Ned said. We'll both watch Bolton. 2 sets of eyes on a snake is better than 1. Bolton is a lord, not a snake. Lords and snakes are different categories. Bolton occupies both. The watching continued. Ned and the Hound watching Bolton. Bolton watching everything. The silent triangular surveillance that ran beneath the daily business of the camp. The subterranean tension that the Hound's instinct had identified and that Ned's political mind was now monitoring. The monitoring was the thing the other world had not produced, because in the other world, Ned was dead, and dead men did not monitor their bannermen, and the not monitoring had produced the Red Wedding. In this world, the monitoring continued, and the Red Wedding did not happen. Not because the monitoring prevented it directly, because the monitoring produced the awareness that prevented the conditions. The awareness that said, Bolton is watching. Bolton is calculating. Bolton is the man who defects when the calculation changes. Therefore, keep the calculation favorable. Keep the Stark cause winning. Keep the winning continuous enough that the calculation never reaches the tipping point. The keeping was the governance. The governance was Ned's. The fighting was Rob's. The watching was the Hound's. The 3 contributions, the governance, the fighting, the watching, were the combination that the other world had not produced and that this world produced, because a burned man had taken 3 steps on the steps of Baelor's Sept. The Hound killed Lannisters. That was enough. For now. The ending. What the Hound's moment produced. On a night in the Riverlands, after a battle, Ned Stark found the Hound sitting alone by a fire. Not the camp's fire, a separate fire, set apart. The burned man's preference for isolation that was the Hound's most consistent characteristic. The Hound sat alone because the Hound had always sat alone, and because the sitting alone was the thing that the Hound understood, and that the world, despite its constant attempts to include the Hound in something larger, could not change. "You're alone," Ned said. "I'm always alone." "You don't have to be." "I choose to be. The choosing is the thing." Ned sat. Not invited, the Hound did not invite. Ned sat because sitting was the Northern Lord's prerogative, and because the sitting was the conversation's beginning. "The war is changing," Ned said. "Wars always change. That's what wars do. The war is changing because you changed it. On the steps, the moment you moved. Don't make it noble. I know, you've told me, repeatedly, for 3 weeks. Don't make it noble. Don't make it heroic. Don't make it the thing that the songs would make it. The songs make everything into something it isn't. The songs are wrong about most things. The songs are not wrong about this." The Hound looked at Ned. The burned face. The firelight. The light that the Hound hated, because the light was the thing that had made the burns. The light that was the Hound's oldest enemy, and the Hound's constant companion. "I'm not a good man, Stark. I know. I've killed men who didn't deserve killing. I've followed orders that didn't deserve following. I've stood beside a king who didn't deserve standing beside. I'm not the hero. I'm the dog that bit its master. The master deserved the biting. The master is a vicious boy. The biting was reflex. The dog's response to the thing the dog couldn't stomach. And now the dog is loose. No master, no collar. No purpose, except the fighting and the wine and the road. You have a purpose. Killing Lannisters is not a purpose, it's a hobby. Protecting my daughter is a purpose." The Hound held this. The father's observation that the Hound had, over the 3 weeks of the road and the 3 weeks of the war, become the thing that the Hound would deny, and that the evidence supported. Arya's protector. "I'm not protecting your daughter. You taught her to clean her sword. You corrected her grip. You told her to stop swinging from the shoulder. You sat between her and the sellswords. You put your body between her and every threat on the road. That's not protecting. That's proximity. Proximity that keeps a girl alive is protection, regardless of what you call it. I call it proximity. I call it the reason I'm going to trust you. Trust. That's a big word for a man who's known me 3 weeks. Trust is not time-based. Trust is evidence-based. The evidence is you stopped an execution. You carried me out of King's Landing. You navigated the road. You fought the sellswords. You kept my daughter alive. The evidence is sufficient. Sufficient for trust. Sufficient for trust. The Hound held the fire, the light, the thing he hated and the thing he needed. The burned man sitting beside the Northern Lord who was offering the thing that the Hound had not been offered since before the burning, since before the brother's cruelty and the father's silence and the world's indifference, since before the Hound became the Hound. Trust, not earned through honor, not earned through duty, earned through disgust, the moment on the steps when the Hound's gut rejected the lie, and the rejection produced the action, and the action produced the escape, and the escape produced the road, and the road produced the war, and the war produced this, the fire, the offer, the trust. "All right," the Hound said. "All right. All right. I'll protect your daughter. Not because you asked, because the girl is the one thing in this war that hasn't tried to be something it isn't. The girl is honest. Honest is, the Hound held the word. Honest is the thing I understand. Honest is what you are. Honest is the only thing I am. The fire crackled. The fire was the thing the Hound hated. Every fire, every flame. The heat that reached across the darkness and touched the burned side of the Hound's face with the reminder that the burns had never healed, not physically. The scars were permanent, the tissue dead, and not psychologically. The fear was permanent, the memory alive. Ned noticed. The Lord whose observation was the Stark observation, not the Spider's intelligence gathering or the Lannisters' political monitoring, but the honest watching of a man who saw what was in front of him and who processed the seeing through compassion rather than calculation. You hate the fire, Ned said. Don't. You sit as far from the flames as you can while still receiving the heat. You flinch when the wood pops. I said don't. Clegane. The fire is the thing I don't talk about. The fire is the Hound's voice. The change. The drop from the blunt, rough, conversational voice to the other voice. The lower voice. The voice that came from the place where the Burns lived and where the Burns' origin lived and where the 7-year-old boy who had been pressed into a brazier by his own brother lived. The fire is the thing that made me, the Hound said. Not the Burns, the thing that made me. The person, the Hound. The man who doesn't trust and doesn't love and doesn't believe in the words that other men believe in. The fire made the Hound. My brother made the fire. My father watched. Your father? My father watched his eldest son burn his youngest son's face, and my father did nothing. My father watched. And the watching, the father's watching, was worse than the burning, because the burning was a brother's cruelty, and cruelty is the world's default. But the watching, the father's silence, that was the thing that taught me that the world's institutions, fathers, families, the things that we're supposed to protect, the institutions don't protect. The institutions watch. Ned held this. The story, not told but extracted, the Hound's history pulled from the burned man's resistance like a blade from a wound, the telling that was not the Hound's choice but the fire's, the flames producing the memory, and the memory producing the words. I'm sorry, Ned said. Sorry is the word that people use when they can't change the thing they're sorry about. The thing is unchanged. The sorry is, it's words. The words matter. The words matter to men who believe in words. I believe in swords. You believe in more than swords. Don't tell me what I believe. You believe in honesty. You believe in the distinction between right killing and wrong killing. You believe that a man on his knees who was promised the wall should get the wall and not the sword. That's not belief. That's standards, basic standards, the minimum that a man should be able to expect from the world. In Westeros, the minimum is a high standard. Then Westeros is the problem, not me. The fire crackled. The Hound did not flinch. The Hound did not flinch because Ned was watching, and the watching was the thing that the Hound would not permit to see the flinching, the pride that was the Hound's last defense against the fire's memory. It's enough. Is it? It's everything. The fire crackled. The camp slept. The war waited. The burned man and the Northern Lord sat at the fire and held the thing that the world had not expected them to hold, an understanding, built not on honor or duty or the pretty words that knights used, built on the thing that Sandor Clegane had carried his entire life without knowing it had value, honesty. The Hound's honesty had stopped an execution. The Hound's honesty had saved a lord. The Hound's honesty had changed a war. The future. What the 3 steps produced. The war continued. The war would continue. The War of the 5 Kings was not the kind of war that one act of defiance could end. The war was larger than the Hound. The war was larger than Ned. The war was the product of decades of political dysfunction, and the dysfunction did not heal because a burned man had stopped an execution. But the war was different. Different because Ned Stark was alive, and alive Ned Stark was the advisor that Robb Stark needed. Different because the Hound was fighting for the North, and the Hound's fighting was the weapon that the battles required. Different because Arya was found, and Arya's finding was the family's partial reassembly, the thing that gave the fighting its purpose. Different because Bolton, watched by Ned and the Hound, did not defect. Different because the Freys, assessed by Ned's political mind, were managed rather than trusted. The management that said, "We know you're transactional. We accept the transactional. We manage the transaction to our advantage." Different because Sansa, hostage in King's Landing, was the subject of negotiation rather than abandonment. The negotiation that Ned conducted through Tyrion, the one Lannister whose word was worth something, and that would, eventually, produce the exchange that freed the girl. Different because the North fought smart as well as hard. The combination that Ned's survival had produced, Robb's tactical brilliance and Ned's political competence, and the Hound's combat excellence, the combination that was stronger than any single element and that the other world had not assembled because the other world had killed the political element on the steps of a sept. The difference was the Hound's. Not because the Hound was a hero, not because the Hound had saved the realm, not because the 3 steps on Baelor's sept were the kind of thing that songs celebrated and that Meisters recorded in the histories. The difference was the Hound's, because the difference was the product of honesty. The honesty that said, "This killing is wrong." The honesty that moved the body before the mind could stop it. The honesty that was not courage. The Hound did not believe in courage, and was not honor. The Hound actively rejected honor, and was not any of the pretty words that the world used to describe the things that good men did. The honesty was the Hound's, the only thing the Hound claimed, the only thing the Hound valued, the only thing the Hound believed in. And the honesty changed the world. Not because honesty was powerful, because in a court of liars, in a city of schemers, in a kingdom built on the lies that powerful men told to justify the things they did, in that court and that city and that kingdom, honesty was the most radical act a man could commit. The Hound committed it. On the steps, in front of the world, 3 steps and a sword swing, and the refusal to be the lie. The Hound's honesty was the thing. What if the Hound saved Ned Stark? He saved him not through honor, not through duty, not through the noble impulse that songs celebrated and knights claimed. He saved him through disgust, the physical, visceral, gut-level rejection of a lie dressed as justice, the body's refusal to participate in the murder of a good man by a vicious boy. The disgust was honest. The honesty was the weapon, and the weapon, 3 steps, a sword swing, a burned man moving before his mind could stop him. The weapon changed the war. Ned lived. Arya was found. Robb had his father. The North fought with purpose instead of grief. The Hound, the killer, the dog, the burned man who believed in nothing. The Hound discovered that the nothing he believed in was in fact something. That the disgust was a moral instinct. That the refusal to participate in a lie was, in its own rough and ugly and thoroughly unpoetic way, a form of honor. Not the honor of knights, not the honor of white cloaks and sworn oaths and the pretty words that covered the ugly deeds. The Hound's honor, the only kind that was real, the kind that said, "I will not watch this happen. I will not stand here. I will not be the lie." 3 steps, 1 sword swing, 1 burned man. The burned man sat by a fire in the Riverlands and held a cup of wine, and looked at the flames and did not flinch. Not because the flinching had stopped. The flinching would never stop. The burn's memory was permanent, and the fear was permanent, and the 7-year-old boy who had been pressed into a brazier was still inside the 30-year-old man who sat beside the fire. The flinching continued. The Hound did not flinch because Arya was watching. And the Hound, the man who did not care what the world thought, the man who had built his identity on the rejection of the world's opinion, the Hound cared what the girl thought. The caring was the thing the Hound would deny. The caring was also the thing that kept the Hound's body still when the flames danced and the memory said, "Run." "You're staring at the fire," Arya said, sitting beside him. The girl's place. The place beside the burned man that had become the girl's default position. The location that Arya occupied with the territorial certainty of a wolf pup who had claimed a spot and who was not moving. "I'm looking at it." "You hate it." "I hate a lot of things." "You hate the fire most." The fire is the thing that happened to me. The other things I hate are the things the world did. The fire is the thing my blood did. The blood thing is always worse. Your brother." "Don't say..." The Hound stopped. The stopping was different this time. Not the wall, the door. The wall prevented passage. The door permitted it, if the person on the other side was the right person. "My brother. Yes. I'll kill him for you." "You will not." "I will. He's on my list too." "The mountain is not, girl. The mountain is 8 feet tall and weighs more than a horse. You weigh less than his breakfast. Syrio said size doesn't... Syrio is dead. Size matters. The mountain's size is the thing that makes the mountain the mountain. Then you kill him. That's the plan. It's a good plan. It's the only plan. The mountain is mine. The killing is mine. The Hound held the fire. The flames. The memory. The settling is mine. Then I'll watch. You'll watch from a safe distance. I'll watch from wherever I want. You'll watch from a safe distance, or I'll put you over my shoulder and carry you to a safe distance. You've already carried one Stark. Don't make a habit of it. The Starks are a family of people who need carrying. It's your defining characteristic. Our defining characteristic is wolves. Wolves who need carrying. The fire crackled. The girl and the burned man sat beside the thing the burned man hated, and the sitting was the thing that the road had produced, the companionship. Not friendship, the Hound's word for it was proximity. Not family, the Hound did not have the vocabulary for family. Companionship, the being beside, the sitting with, the wolf pup and the scarred dog, together at the fire, the girl who was on the burned man's list, and the burned man who was on the girl's list, and the lists that had become the strange foundation of the strangest bond in the 7 kingdoms. "I'm taking you off my list," Arya said. The Hound looked at the girl. "Not because I forgive you. Not for Micah. I don't forgive that. I won't ever forgive that. I haven't asked you to. I'm taking you off because the list is for people I want dead. And I don't want you dead. I want you." The girl searched. The 11-year-old's vocabulary reaching for the word that the 11-year-old's experience had not provided. "I want you here, beside me, at the fire. Being terrible and rude and teaching me sword things you pretend you don't teach me. That's what I want. You're off the list. You're on a different list." "What list?" "The list of people I'd miss." The Hound held this. The word, miss. The word that implied absence. The word that implied that the girl had imagined the Hound's absence, and that the imagining had produced the feeling that the word described. The girl would miss the Hound. The girl, the fierce, angry, brilliant, 11-year-old wolf pup who had every reason to hate the burned man and who had chosen through the road and the fighting and the fire, to keep the burned man instead. That's the most... The Hound stopped. Not the wall. Not the door. The thing that happened when the door was open and the person on the other side said the thing that the person inside had needed to hear for 30 years. "You'd miss me," the Hound said. "Don't make it weird." "I'm not making it weird. You're making a face. This is my face. The face is the face. The burns are the face. Not the burns. The other thing. The thing your face does when it's trying to... Never mind. Trying to what? Smile. Your face is trying to smile. And it doesn't know how. My face knows how to smile. Show me." The Hound showed her. The smile was... It was not the smile of a courtier or a lord or a man who smiled professionally. The smile was rough and uneven, and the burned side pulled wrong, and the unburned side compensated, and the result was the thing that only Arya would have recognized as a smile, because only Arya had been looking at the Hound's face long enough to read the burned muscles version of the expression. "That's terrible," Arya said. "I told you. It's terrible, and I like it. You have awful taste. I have honest taste." Honest? The word. The Hound's word. The only word the Hound valued, spoken by the girl who had learned the word from the man and who was now returning it to the man as a gift. The fire crackled. The girl and the burned man sat at the flames. The list was shorter by one name. The other list, the list of people the girl would miss, was longer by one name. And the world changed.